Number one, I'd like to welcome Dave Hardman as alternate member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Welcome to the Rumble. In addition, Victoria Goss will be seated for Peter Levy. And our evening's agenda is decreasing by the minute. Items number 1, Town of Greenwich Parks and Rec, is postponed. Item number 2, Town of Greenwich Parks and Rec, is postponed. Item number 3, Town of Greenwich Public Works, is postponed. Item number 4, Town of Greenwich Public Works, is postponed. Item number 6, Lot 2A and 2B of 176 Hamilton Avenue, is postponed. And lastly, item number 14, 140 Greenwich Avenue, is not going to be open this evening.
And number 15.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Number 15 is postponed. So, moving along in the agenda, we're already up to number 5, and it's only taken us 3 minutes to get there, so keep up the pace.
Mr. Chair, do you want to mention about the
Oh, I'm sorry.
Center for Hope and Renewal?
I do. Apparently, there's a rumor floating around that we were going to decide that this evening, and we are not. We will alert the two attorneys involved when we're going to be making a decision, and I guess the word will get out.
We'll bring our supporting casts with us.
Whatever. Number 5, which is Barry D. and Helena Parkin, final coastal site plan.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. For the record, Tom Hegney, on behalf of the applicant. We shouldn't let Mr. Hardman think that this is how all of the Commission meetings are, with an empty room and an abbreviated agenda. But you should get home before 2 this morning.
Let's not warn him off. It took us long enough to fill the
Well,
position.
now that he's already signed up, we
let's
don't
get through
have
at least
to,
one meeting with him if we could.
This is a coastal site plan application for a property at 33 Twin Lakes Drive. It is located in the X, the AE, and the V zones. We have been to the Board of Appeals for a variance, and the variance was due to the fact that our lot shape does not fit in anywhere on the lot. And since it's a rear lot, that would mean that our floor area was 0. So we needed to get a variance for the house that we're proposing to construct. We've also been to the Wetland Agency and received a permit from the Wetland Agency for the new construction. Current house that I've highlighted in blue on the plan is located in the AE 12 zone, and is at elevation, the first floor is at elevation 12. And when my clients purchased the property, they first looked to see whether this was something that they could renovate in place, found that there had already been significant work done on the house, and that being able to renovate it would exceed the 50% rule, which then leads us to the next step of, could it be elevated a foot or so to meet the current flood zone elevations. And they had engineers and architects look at that and determined that that was not feasible. So we currently have a house that is non-compliant as to the flood zone regulations because of the first floor elevation. It is located very close to the tidal wetlands, which I've highlighted in yellow. This is a situation where the inland wetlands.
You need to get another color in your palette, because we can't see it.
Or a newer marker.
Perfect, I think.
These are the tidal wetlands.
Okay.
This is the this is the proposed house, and our existing house is right here. So actually, we are the same distance from the tidal wetlands on this easterly property line as what's proposed. The light green here is the inland wetlands. So the building that we're proposing is at elevation 15.5 for the first floor, which is more than sufficient to meet the elevation 13 for the AE 12 zone. I know you've received a memo from Mr. Goucher at the state DEP, and I want to discuss that with you because essentially what he's saying in the 3 pages is, although you had the opportunity in 2013 when FEMA suggested making changes, which were an option for the limited wave action area in the AE zone, even though you looked at that and you did not choose to adopt those regulations, he wants you to apply them anyway. And by that I mean,
Not how I just read it. Go ahead and tell us.
I didn't want to have to read the whole 3 pages. The VE line is here. Our building is completely in the AE and partially in the X zone. And what he's saying is that because it's in a close proximity to the VE zone, that there may be wave action that occurs in the AE, which was part of the FEMA suggestion and the state suggestion that towns could, at their option, adopt this limited wave action area within the AE zone. So they're saying the waves don't stop at the VE line. They may continue on, and therefore, even though you're in the AE zone, we want you to design the house as if it's in the VE zone.
Are you, I'm sure you're going to answer this yes, but I mean, you know that Mr. Goucher is aware that the town did not adopt those regulations?
Yes, he
And
does say that, but then he goes on to say, but you really should be applying them anyway,
Well,
even though that's not a regulation that the town has.
what he's saying is, per our regulations, Mr. Chairman, 6-111, where it says that we need to be paying attention to the state statutes on this, and his comment back is that he doesn't believe that this project is in keeping with the policy, the coastal area management policies, and so what he's applying is the concept of the wave action. In other words, it's a piece of information that he's using in order to determine whether or not this project complies with the coastal policies of the state. So he's saying that because you're as close as you are with your building, that's a piece of information that should be considered, and you can do that under your regulations because they do refer to those statutes.
Yeah, but so what he's got is he says that the town regulations do not require the dwellings proposed in the Limwa to be elevated. However, the designation of the moderate wave action indicates an area of predictive wave heights, and that should be noted. And then he goes on to say that this proposal is inconsistent policy-wise with, is this 3 different items? Yes. 3 different parts of policy.
Right.
So he's not saying, as I read this, Mr. Hegney, and we should probably have more time to do so, but he's not saying that we should apply the regulation, but rather he's noting that we don't have it, and that regardless, what the proposal is inconsistent with state policy in general, and because of the increase to 4.5 feet closer to the title.
But in all of his replies over the last
You got it.
years, he's never brought this up.
Exactly. Last week was the first time that
What,
he.
and so I don't understand, we had Club Road where you're building a structure right next to a V zone, and I don't understand how, he's basically saying our coastal regulations aren't in conformance with the state regulations, so I can't approve any of them.
Well, he's not saying.
That's what he's saying.
No, he's not saying that. He's saying that I recognize your regulations aren't don't have this piece in them, but this proposal is inconsistent with the state policy for 3 reasons. It
Well,
has
excuse-
nothing to do with the specific
But
regulation.
if you design it to the VE standards, then it's okay.
Well, and it naturally, because the V standards means you have a wave action, 3 feet or more. The moderate wave action is between 3 and 1.5, and then the AE is 1.5 and below. So he's saying, you know that you are gonna get wave action here of 1.5. So I think it's just being conservative. What he doesn't mention, and I think is worth noting for the record, is that the FEMA modeling that is done to create the insurance rate maps in the first place didn't include Sandy, and it doesn't include sea level rise.
No,
So
that's true.
so if you really start looking at these things in totality, I think it's prudent to make sure that we're not creating an unsafe situation here.
Well,
But if the,
And if there are regulations and construction methods that one can apply in order not to have this problem, I don't see that I'm not sure why you would want to create something that would potentially be a problem.
we designed this to meet the town's zoning regulations and the policy and recommendations that DEP has had in the past. We just did one in January at 5 Meadow. And this is the same design that we have here. And all of a sudden,
Fox
it's
is-
not okay.
Well, Mr. Fox is making the same comment, and he wasn't at the briefing session, and we said the same thing at the briefing session yesterday. What has changed? Because in the last 2 meetings, we're suddenly getting from Mr. Goucher recommendations that something is not prudent, or that it doesn't make, whatever he is conceptually at ill at ease, if you will, with a proposal. So what we would like to do, and we were talking to Katie about yesterday, is have the applicant talk to Mr. Goucher and have us talk to Mr. Goucher, because if their policy is shifted, we need to understand that. If they're applying their policy differently, we have to know that, because he's telling us that something isn't prudent.
And we need to know that
And
too.
so we all need to know, because we don't want to go ahead with something that the state's telling us is a dumb idea.
But
Because,
this wasn't in his first round of comments.
yeah,
Yeah, it was.
No.
yeah, it is.
The VE wasn't.
This is,
let me ask,
No, it wasn't.
okay,
what
but
is- what is the
Well,
practice?
His first round of comments were about the drainage and the way you were dealing with the flooding. It had nothing to do with the proximity of this building and the wave action.
what are you
that I-
looking at?
Mr. Goucher's original comments on this application.
Is that page 20, I think?
Read the last sentence of it.
No, not the letter, the current letter. the
Yeah.
Previous.
Well, he does, on page 20 is where he has the
His
original
first letter.
comment.
His
that he's-
original comment.
Where he does mention the limited moderate wave action that is not on the site plans or site survey. He checked the original firm, and it appears to confirm the location of the various flood hazard areas in our GIS.
But is there, let me just try to see if we can get around this thing, but is there a practical application to deal with this? Or does it mean that you can never have a house located in this?
Well, I think when discussions today, what Mr. Goucher would like is if it could at least be moved further away from the tidal wetlands, number one.
Back to its original
And
location.
what I had suggested was, what if the applicant constructed to V-zone standards, would that help? And he said, yes, but whatever they're going to propose, I don't have time to review it, and the director is out of the office. So the end result was, maybe, but I don't have time to review it, because that just came in today. So to your point, to Ms. Albin's point, I think if Mr. Hegney wanted to speak to Mr.
Well-
Goucher, and
Yeah, it does remind me of something that happened a couple of years ago when we had applications pending on a couple of subdivisions where Public Works came out and issued a memo that said, no, you can't get a drainage exemption for a subdivision of 2 lots. Well, and that came out after we had actually filed the applications, and in one case, we had already had a hearing on it, and I think Nancy Raymer at the time said, you know, this is not appropriate for a government body to be doing. You're changing the regulation, you're changing the rules of the game after an application has been submitted.
not necessarily, because his original comment has come in. I think, back to Ms. Sullivan's point, are you objecting to going back to Mr. Goucher? Is that where?
I'm always happy to talk to John, and
Because I don't think he's-
these comments surprised me.
Well, they
This
surprised.
is not what I generally have been receiving from him
No,
over the years.
Mr. Hegney, we agree with you that this and another one that he made similar comments on have surprised us because it feels like a different application of their policy. I don't think he changed it midstream on your application because his first set of comments on this application is the one that he says, he has the caution on. What you are correct about is that he has not cautioned us similarly on other applications which, on the face of it, seem not too different. So we
and
need to
I-
understand it.
Rather than, are you at all willing to, let's just see if, does moving the building closer or further away from the tidal wetlands cause you a problem?
It's not
The way Mr. DeAndrea has located it on the property, we're 20 feet from the sideline here. We could be 15 feet. So we could
So-
move it over 5 feet there.
And that's all he
and-
wants.
And that, well, that's all he's going to get, because then he's into a required yard.
Then we're up against the,
he
and
only wants-
we can't go this way because that's where the
into
tidal wetlands are.
Right,
No,
and I
he
think just for the record, I do just want to say this, that I think we need clarification from Mr. Goucher. So he stated
Yes.
in both instances that you were just referring to, that he needs more time on it. So I don't think, we don't know that there's been policy changes or anything along those lines. But I think there's just confusion in his comments, hence the reason you've asked the applicants to go back and review it.
But Mr. Hegney, he's asking, as I read that email quickly, but it sounds like he's asking for 4.5 feet. If you give him 5 feet, it sounds like we're there. Maybe, but you should talk to him.
We can certainly move it there. The client would like to maximize their views going down the southwest on the Sound. But we certainly could make that move.
Do you have any comment about his comments about the retaining walls in the front of the building?
I'm going to have Tony
Because he's nodding.
speak to that.
Tony DeAndrea for the Parkins. The suggestion by Mr. Goucher that we're going to come back in a couple of days for a retaining wall or a seawall, I think is unfounded. That's what he suggests.
Oh, no, he says the.
He says,
His
you're likely to
memo
come.
refers to the 2 retaining walls in the front yard.
Yeah, that's what he's talking about, that,
In addition, we are evaluating whether the proposed retaining walls in the front yard area meet the CCMA definition of a shoreline flood and erosion control structure.
That's something that Mr. Goucher typically does, refer to any retaining wall as a flood and erosion control wall, no matter where it is. In fact, you remember on Meadow, I was worried about a 6-inch curb being a flood and erosion control structure. I read it as he was concerned about possibly coming back on the south side
No, but
of the
front
building.
yard.
But these over here on the side are designed to maintain a separation from the wetlands, the inland wetlands for them, and to provide a level driveway so that we could pitch the water to the middle into the rain garden to satisfy the drainage manual. So I think we balanced those out fairly well. The suggestion that we design completely to VE zone would require us to raise the house another couple of feet from the VE zone of 14.
Plus
would
have
be
breakaway walls.
and breakaway walls, which we feel are unnecessary in this case. So I think a compromise is not to raise the building up as high as it could or should be if you were doing true VE zone design, but recognize that it will definitely be structurally sound to withstand that 3 to 1 foot wave action if it should occur.
Meaning you'll have breakaway walls? What do you mean when you say that?
We don't want to have breakaway walls. We do have the necessary flood vents for the design in the AE zone and have a building structurally designed to withstand that flood event. But they're suggesting if you're actually in the VE zone where the wave action is higher and potentially more frequent, it might make sense to do that. But after the wave starts to break, as he said, you're looking at a 3 to 1 foot drop in the AE zone, and therefore we can withstand that pressure on a structural design.
So would you agree to do the breakaway wall but not elevate it to the VE standard? Like, in other words, meet it halfway?
I would have to agree, Katie, that if you're looking for a compromise, I suppose you could do that. Perhaps one breakaway wall on the side, if that's what he's worried about. because it just really is unnecessary in this location. The shoreline is heavily stabilized and strengthened already. Someone mentioned Sandy. Since Sandy, I think Ms. Alban said,
No,
Alban said that.
Katie said that the FEMA models had
Okay,
includes.
but that was elevation 10. We're up at elevation 15.5 for the first floor. And then you add on 2 or 3 feet to that. And I believe that the solution that we had anticipated could be done is to slide the house to the west to meet the minimum side yard setback, where we would then be increasing the setback another 5 feet, almost 10 feet from the edge of the tidal wetland, and also increasing the distance. Mr. Goucher mentioned his concern that perhaps we would encroach upon the coastal jurisdiction line. I can assure you, we won't be past the coastal jurisdiction line with a silt fence. However, sliding it west 5 feet would ensure that we would never get close to the coastal jurisdiction line. So I think that would be the appropriate compromise. Move it 5 feet to the west, which would increase the distance from mean high water as well as from the tidal wetlands. Design structurally, rather than just the flood vents, make sure that you withstood the wave action as though it were in the VE zone. And then I think we've got a solid building, and dare I say, a good plan.
Can you respond what FEMA guidelines are for design of structures in this zone?
Mr. Fox, I'm not a qualified structural engineer, so I wouldn't be commenting on that tonight, but we'll certainly retain a qualified structural engineer for coastal
Because it
structures.
seems like we're between two zones, and I can't believe FEMA has not made some kind of paper or recommendation on structures in this limited wave action area.
Yeah,
And I think that my recommendation, I would look that up and propose that as a solution versus putting it on piles.
yeah,
I don't think they were going to put it on
Well,
piles.
that's what Mr.
No.
Goucher thought.
no, that's not what we're
No, because we
proposing
don't
to
have
do.
that regulation.
Yeah, and
Where did he say that? In this latest thing that I don't have?
No, I thought he said in that memo that it's not a regulation we have.
No, it isn't. He's saying his recommendations would be putting it on files,
Okay.
allowing the waves to go through the
Not
building.
how
And this was a letter from DEP back on January 7th, 2013, to Diane when she was a town planner, and it indicates that you can adopt this limit of moderate wave action regulation, which would require it to meet the V-zone requirements, but that it's optional, and the commission chose not to do that, and now he's coming back and saying, well, but do it anyway, because we have other sections of the statute that are much less distinct and clear that we're now going to apply to this. And I
Well, they
think
don't-
that's inappropriate.
They're not standards. I think it was sort of it's like a preface to a, to a section. It just, because it has no meaningful standard to
Right.
that 111 comment.
So, but,
So it seems, I think what we need to do is, you're just going to have to get together with him and get us something that's clean, that you can live with, and that,
I think Mr. DeAndrea's comment of those issues, actually, to discuss the location, discuss the structural integrity of the foundation, I think those 2 points to Mr. Goucher. It would be interesting to know, actually, if he accepts it, why he would accept that kind of situation in the limited wave action zone, just for benefit for us and you as applicant, that kind of thing, because I agree with you. This is something new.
Yeah.
It seems that, I guess, we should kind of understand where he's coming from as well.
Yeah,
And if this kind of situation where if you're designing structurally for a VE zone, which is more strict than the limited wave action, maybe that actually is a solution going forward.
yeah, I do find it disturbing to be this far along and end up with these particular kind of comments. There were a couple of other
it's
things.
his first pass at you. That's the thing
Right,
I
this
don't
is-
understand. This is
this
you
is the
say it's
process.
this far along, but This is the first time he's commented, it's the first time we've seen it. It's not like we've been working on this for 6 months.
No, but we
You
have
have.
we have a
But you have-
ongoing dialogue with him on all kinds of projects there, and it's just been in the last month that we're getting comments like this. If he had,
Okay.
we have other projects that are in very similar design and location, and we're not getting these comments. It's a
Okay,
no
but-
comment, or we have
Let
no
me-
issue.
Let me put it to you
And all of a
this way.
sudden now, we're having issues all over the place.
But your comment about this far along is not appropriate to this venue, because here, it's the first time we've seen it, and here, it relates to the very first comments we got from him. So for us, it is not so far along, and that's what I'm saying. I get your frustration, but for us, this is new, and yes, we're struggling to make sure we understand it as well, and do understand your frustration.
It's not going to get me much, though, tonight.
No,
though,
it's
is it?
not. But sympathy's always better than
Going
lack
to get you
of.
caught in a snowstorm if we keep talking about it, that's for sure.
Well, this is my only item, so I'm going to go home. The
Okay,
rest
go
of you,
You're
you're
gonna
on
beat
your
the
own.
emergency by an hour and a half.
I did want to touch on the one issue of abasement, because we actually do have a definition in 6-139.1 of basement. And basement means that portion of a building having its floor subgrade below ground on all sides. And so that's why we have the rest of, who knew these zoning regulations could be so complicated?
Oh, sorry.
To paraphrase a phrase, when you look at the grade plane that was adopted in 2014 as a result of Sandy,
Yes.
and as a result of 24 applications going in front of the ZBA within a year on this very issue, it says that you measure 2 feet below the base flood of elevation for your grade plane. It just so happens that our average grade as measured and our grade plane measured from the 2 feet below the base flood elevation are the same. But it says the area below the flood zone grade plane shall not count as a story, provided there is no more than 7 feet from the flood zone grade plane to the top of the finished floor. Here we have it's 15, elevation 15.5 from 10, so it's 5.5 feet.
You figure we made a mistake?
No. No, it's clear that it's not a basement. And so when you go then to 6-139.1 F11A, where it says, new construction or substantial improvement of any residential structure shall have the lowest floor, including basement, elevated at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation. That doesn't apply here because it's not a basement under the very regulations that we have here.
But what do you figure that, does it meet the intent?
Very much so, because then you look at,
Okay, I'm
At
just checking with
subsection
the
D-
architect. I'm just checking with
I
the
think
architects.
the interesting thing about this site, and I think this is the thing I think it may be throwing us, is that we have a coastal site which we kind of usually think of relatively flat, but this one isn't. You have 2 sides that are buried, we have 2 sides that are open, in a sense. It's got flood vents. We would think it'd actually be open because of the way this location. I think there was some confusion on our part as to, is it a basement or not?
yeah, because the site does increase, and so actually a portion of it is in the X zone.
Yeah.
And did you all see the email from Marisa Anastasia, who
Yes.
had the opportunity to speak with Jody on this?
Yeah, and he interprets it, well, it's counterintuitive to me.
The way I've read this is that it would comply, the way it's
Correct.
proposed.
But that's counterintuitive to me.
Right, well, and that's what I had been saying yesterday, that if it's vented, then it can be below the BFE.
Yeah.
Whether it's a basement or not, and
Well,
he's articulated it
Yeah.
this.
I think it's because of the nature of this particular site, the topography actually provides for the venting in a full depth basement, which we rarely see.
Right, and we've done that internally, with applications that don't necessarily come to you.
Right.
But the idea of the flood zone regulations is that you not be in that space that could fill up with water.
Right, and they won't be in the space
It's vent.
because it's vented. But I will say
Right,
that
it's
this
vented on
came up
two
about
sides.
3 or 4
But only on
years
two
ago.
sides, so it may not empty out.
And Jody and I did spend some quality time with Diane Ivkovic on this, who's our
Okay.
representative from FEMA, because we did initially have the same questions. It was a slope lot. I think, Tony, actually, you were involved in that one. And we were settled on it in the end. So we've been,
Okay.
you know,
It's very standard.
Just one quick comment about the grading. The unique part about this is we're not touching two sides at all, and on the north side, we're hitting the same elevations that are around the existing house. And the last comment I would make about the comment that you interpret about the proposed retaining wall, that's basically a replication of the existing house. The wall is the same thing. The deflection is not going to be affected by that.
I
So
only
we'll talk about
commented on it because Mr. Goucher commented
I
on
know,
it.
we'll take that up.
Well, and the basement under FEMA guidelines, you're not allowed to have equipment. All it can be used for storage. It's not habitable space.
Correct.
Per se. And it's like a garage.
yeah, all the mechanicals have to be elevated,
right.
so. yeah.
And that's what we have here.
Right.
I know there had also been a comment on this wall here that's 4.5 feet in some places. It's not a grade plane wall. We're measuring off the flood zone grade plane. And actually, wetlands asked us to extend the wall to act as a demarcation barrier over to the detached garage. We will have our discussions with Mr. Goucher. I just wanted to make sure there weren't any other issues we needed to be addressing in the interim, other than this.
Just confirming that the variance from ZBA was because of the tail on the lot?
This is the lot shape.
The circle, can't get it in any part.
And the way Section 6-131, another complicated part of our zoning regulations, says that if you're a rear lot, you measure your lot area for zoning purposes where the lot shape fits. Well, my lot shape doesn't fit. So therefore, my floor area for the lot is 0. What we did was we said, okay, we'll deduct this portion from the curve in that lot shape between that and the road, which will give us a net number, which Mr. DeAndrea has here, and that that would be a reasonable use of the property, and that's what
So
the
that became
variance
the
was. that was
denominator
granted.
for your FAR?
Correct.
If you will, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's how the Board of Appeals looked at it. It creates a problem for the rear lots because otherwise you can't build anything.
Just have a question, just since it's the first time I think I've ever seen it, where the actual grade plane is the same number to the flood zone grade plane, not even a tenth of a difference. So,
That was the same
We
question
would-
I asked Mr.
so
DeAndrea
the
this
question
morning.
is, on a tie, who wins? Okay.
Anticipating your question again, I'm getting good at it.
I think you must have a microphone in the briefing room, so that's what I'm thinking.
I didn't hear that one at all, but I took
Oh, you didn't?
He-
Oh.
He does get the comments that you make on the particular items that we have for you, though.
Anyway, in here I have a grade plane study, another grade plane study. Come on, it's in here. Mr. Brown, hurry up, I want to get this.
Well, we gotta be out of here by 9. They close the parking lot.
Here,
It's not an emergency.
Oh, yeah, right here.
No, it's not an emergency. You can't park on emergency routes.
This emergency shelter.
It's not an emergency route.
15,
You're just being
This is an
silly.
emergency shelter.
9.8.
No kidding.
Anticipating that could be an issue, and Ty goes to the runner, I just adjusted a couple of grades on the westerly side to create a little bit more of a swale than I had, and it drops it down to 9 point.
Kicked it over so the flood
Right,
zone.
it just knocks it down to 9.7.
Okay.
All the other pieces were the same, I just created a deeper swale. So it drops it down
I
to
knew you'd
9.7.
find a way around it, so it
But, yeah.
was no longer a tie.
So we look forward to be back in front of you on April 3rd.
Is that right?
Well, weather
Well, we'll just.
Physical
yeah.
restraint.
pending.
I mean, the agenda comes out on Friday, so we'll just see how far you
Let's
got
see
it.
it. Well, it's just a site plan anyway, so it
It's a packed
doesn't
meeting.
require publication. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Next item is 257 Bruce Park Avenue, final subdivision.
All more pictures.
Richard, did you ask for public comment on the last one?
Oh, I did not. Sorry. We didn't close it, so
Yeah, was there anyone, I don't know if you want to just.
is there anyone that had any public comment on the prior application? The 33 Twin Lakes Lane?
No, good.
Thank you. I did not.
Good evening. Eric Brower on behalf of the applicant. We'll try to pick up the pace again. We're off to a good start, slow down a little. Tonight's application is actually 3 parts. It's a 2-lot subdivision followed by 2 separate site plan special permit applications for two family homes.
Sure.
I handed out a little package of information for you. On the cover sheet, you'll notice there's on the left is a copy of the zoning map with our site highlighted in orange, slightly differentiated than the pink, which is the LBR zone just to the west and across the street. So we're in an R6. We have commercial on our west side, multifamily Wilbur Peck Court on the north side, and other residential properties, single and 2 family, going down Bruce Park. The other side of the sheet shows you the GIS aerial topographic map highlighting the subject property, as well as the easement area that's contiguous to our property and is our proposed means of access to the rear of the property. We go to the second sheet. Well, let's see. We'll go to the deed is the actual survey calls it a right-of-way and a right-of-way. So we are using it for ingress and egress in accordance with the deed. So it's, I'm not sure the difference it actually makes to the project. It's not a roadway is what I'm,
Well, you're going to use it as access.
as an
Is
access way.
it currently is the access to
Right.
the garage on the property,
Exactly,
right?
So we propose to maintain that access, well, ingress and egress, as opposed to building a new 20-foot or 12-foot wide driveway immediately
So that's
contiguous.
before ZBA, which,
Yes.
was it going to be tomorrow night?
No, fortunately not, but that may push us
Okay.
over again. But in any event, so it's the right-of-way as shown on the map. We'll get to that in the next exhibits. The second page is photographs of the existing conditions. The top picture is looking east down Bruce Park Avenue, taken in front of the automobile repair facility and the other commercial property. That's the white building. You can see the
The
existing.
white building, the existing
Yes,
building
that-
on the site plan?
correct. Yes, that is the adjacent property. The car repair is a different property.
Right.
So you can see the existing house at 257. It's a very large structure. It's essentially, it's a four-story building. It's a three-family use, which is presently non-conforming in the zoning regulations for the R6 zone. And the picture below shows you the front view of the existing 3 parking spaces that currently back out onto Bruce Park Avenue. If we go to the next sheet, you'll see the right-of-way or access way that we propose to use. The top picture is looking from the curb cut down into the property. The stone retaining wall that you see on the right in the picture is our property line. And I've just highlighted in the striping there the effect of what would happen if we were to construct a separate 12-foot wide driveway running down on our property. So we think that it's definitely a greener solution. It's going to maintain the existing streetscape to share that access way. And the photo at the bottom is looking from the interior of the site back out to Bruce Park Avenue. The next sheet depicts the existing conditions. The building on the left is that white building that was in the previous photographs, again showing the right-of-way. And the area in the back, you can see from the earlier photograph as well that there's a large excavation that occurred years ago with this rock face that then immediately goes up to Wilbur Peck Court. Part of our development plan will be to elevate that grade somewhat back to what it was so that it blends better with the 3 adjoining properties. The next sheet is the subdivision map, which shows our 2 lots and the open space area. Each of the lots are fully conforming to the R6 7,500 square foot minimum lot area. We have a separate access way providing the legal zoning frontage, and we have 15% open space. Almost all of it is fee dedicated. The remaining fraction is in that little shaded area that's going to be made up by way of easement. So the layout itself of the subdivision does comply with the zoning regulations. Go to the next sheet. We're kind of going on to the next part of the applications, but it's still relevant with respect to demonstrating the ability to develop these two-family homes with required parking on separate lots, with the access again shown on the right-of-way. You'll notice in this plan the parking area in the front, which originally was proposed to be 3 spaces backing out as an existing condition. We also felt that was appropriate because it was consistent with your recent amendment in the R6 zone allowing for cars to back out onto Bruce Park Avenue. So we thought that was consistent with your regulations. Obviously, DPW made a comment that they do not wish to see that. They have their particular standards.
Well, it still doesn't comply, though, with the other part of the regulations, which says that on 2-family houses, there should be no parking in the front yard.
Correct. Well, subject to your review, if it's topography or screening that could accommodate that. Alternatively, it's an existing condition that we think we're making better. If I could just jump ahead, rather than the 3 that we proposed originally, this is actually a A2 survey that shows that we can meet the 25 feet at the edge of pavement, 14 feet at the property line, and have 2 10 by 18 foot spaces with a 23-foot back out.
But it seems to me, since all of the parking and the circulation is between the 2 buildings, I don't know why you're still going for the parking in the front yard, which is, number one, not permitted under the regulations, or it says it's not desirable under the regulations for two-family. When in fact, all the rest of the parking is back there, and it seems like there's enough room to get these 2 spaces that you need to get to the 10 with some creativity in that parking area.
Well, we're open to suggestions on that. We've spent an incredible amount of time trying to make it work. Those relate
Well,
to
very
grade
simply,
plane.
very simply, the 2 spaces that you've got on the right-hand side of your drawing, why can't those just be expanded 1 space either way, and you have the 2 spaces you need?
We could, with the exception of that we would have a problem with the grade plane then. We're
With
working
what?
with the grade plane. In other words, those, we're working up on those. You go to the next sheet, you can see that we do have proposed walls there in order to raise the
Sorry,
grade.
which-
Get the last page.
Are you on the last page?
Yes.
I was already there, I guess, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Again, it's a matter, I mean, practically, this parking should be there, and I think it's a matter of you working with your grades a little bit more to make it occur.
Well, we'll certainly look at that. No objection to it. But I would point out, if you're not allowed to park in the front, then that amendment allowing for the backing out onto the private street would be rarely, if ever.
Well, no, I mean, a lot of driveways could be in, you know, you could have the driveway for a house in, and then you're backing out onto the street from that part, but the parking itself is not.
Well, most of it was designed, I think the intent was with a 2-family house with a 2-car garage, you'd be able, most houses would be built at the 25-foot setback, and you'd have the 2 spaces in front of the doors, and that was going to reduce coverage and have things work so that you didn't have to go around to the back. In this case, we're going around to the back anyhow, so if we can make that work, we'll definitely look at that.
I think maybe one of the issues about the parking in the front is that both spaces actually push everything right out to the property line, so I think you'd have trouble with the screening, because then you'd actually be on, into the town right of way, to either side of the driveway. Is that this area here, that's another space, right?
Yes.
Did you,
Additional garage space?
It would cut into living space that we do have provided. Both these houses, if you look at the statistics, we're way under on FAR, way under on lot coverage, so we're trying to actually not max things out. That would be, we could look at that as well. I mean, it's worth exploring. We wouldn't propose the 2 or 3 in the front if it really wasn't in existing condition.
did
May
you?
I ask you just another question, sort of overall planning on the site? Since you're going in for a front yard variance, was there any reason the whole site wasn't moved back to the, I mean, you have your back patios on the other unit, and then between there and the open space, I mean, since the patio is the outdoor area and it's screened by being at a different elevation, it's almost, did you look at that? I mean, it seems like the whole site works better and you don't have to get the front yard variance and so forth, that the whole thing would just slide back.
Well, we did look at this a number of ways. I think what's going to happen is we're going to wind up having a pinch point with the front unit A, probably easier to see on the sheet before. We're going to hit that side yard that we're right up against, so
Gotcha.
so we're pretty tight on that.
Okay.
Did you look at grading the parking off the drive and pulling in from the driveway versus the street for a couple of spots?
Actually, I did, and as soon as we saw the comment from Scott about the 3, we looked, could we produce these 2, or would we come in here? And the amount of grading and rock removal would be substantial, because since this is only 12, we'd have to go in to make the 12 the 23 and then 18. So you wind up taking out literally the entire front yard. So we definitely looked at that, but we're trying to keep, by using the existing driveway as well, to keep that all green. That's a fairly visible part of the property. So that I don't think would work, but we did look at that.
I think one other thing too, this is for me personally, but I think the idea of having this 279 square foot easement so that you can hit the 15% number.
Yes.
I mean, the regulation reads up to 15%, and I think that that is going to end up as just being used practically as somebody's backyard. And I personally would get rid of it and be happier with the 14.7 or 8, whatever it's going to be, percent
Yeah,
open
we could
space.
then put take the jog out and make
Yeah.
it the average just going straight across. That would be less clumsy in terms of
Okay.
enforcement and the
I
like.
agree.
I think so.
Would
I
that-
don't know if other people feel the same way, but that might even help, I don't know, it might help to get the building pushed back a little bit further and ease up some of these other things, I don't know, but I think that's just going to end up, it's unenforceable
Well,
almost.
where it could help is that if sliding, we can't slide the front unit back,
Right, but
but
you
if we
can-
could slide the back unit back.
Right.
That may give us the room to get back our grading
Right.
between the new parking spaces in the back. That's a good suggestion.
Well, and I also noticed you're cutting out the mature trees in the back and still building grade plane walls. Why wouldn't you just grade it out and blend the site versus building the walls back there?
Which trees are you?
The ones with big X's in them.
Oh, those trees.
The three, the one in the, next to the easement, there's one next to the utility pole, and I just don't see why you're cutting them down.
Well, those are in the area, if you look in the pictures that we have in the
No,
first.
I'm looking back here. Here, Mr. Brown, in the way back where.
Yes. Yeah, that's
in-
the area where we were proposing actually to pull the grade up in order to,
Right, but I don't see that on the grading plan.
if you go to, where are we at?
I'm looking at this
It would
thing.
seem like those trees over in their open space.
Right.
Why would you be messing with those? You're not supposed to be doing any regrading in the open space.
Oh, no, we are. This is proposed right now, if you look at the,
What sheet?
let's go to.
See, I don't know why those trees would be taken out.
Oh, strictly because of the fill. This,
But there's no way to build a tree well around them or
But
something?
Eric, I'm just saying is, here's a new grading line here with the wall. There's no
There's
new
92.
grading lines shown in the open space.
oh, right, I'll go back to the microphone.
No, that's
Right.
existing,
We've got a spot grade shown there,
of 91.5.
and the existing is
No,
86.
Okay, so you're not showing a gradient line there.
But why do you even have to do anything in that open space?
Frankly, because it looks like the residual of a mining operation. I would much rather have that grade raised and make it blend better with the retaining walls. Right now, the entire left side of our property in the rear has the properties held up by retaining walls. So essentially, the open space, if you keep it with existing grades, is going to wind up just being a pit with higher grades on all sides. We were trying to blend it back and be happy to replant or take a look at those trees.
You didn't give us a planting plan, did you?
No.
That would be good when you return.
Do we do that for two-family? Do we do that for twos?
It would be good if you could do that.
Especially if you want to get a reduction on your open space.
Well, we can comply, with the open space. We thought this was actually a good plan. If you drive back there, I think you'll see the merits of,
The term good plan has already been taken by somebody. You have to
aspire
find
to it.
another term.
It's been
aspire to
copyrighted.
higher,
I understand what you're saying by looking at the picture,
yes.
but I think the plan needs to be developed showing the actual grading and showing replacement of trees if
That's
it's
fine.
going to be open space, because I like the idea personally that if you eliminate the rear retaining walls and you could grade it naturally, it would look more in keeping.
The other thing is there's a 60-inch oak on the neighboring property.
Yes.
And you've got walls that are, disturbance or whatever, very close to that tree line. So it seems that you would need to take some special measures to make sure that you don't damage that oak tree.
Yeah, that's all going to be in cut, so we're not changing the grades in that area. So, but obviously, we can work with the neighbor during construction if help it be a healthier tree. But it's that whole area, you can see where the cross hatching is essentially solid ledge that it's exposed. So I don't think the roots are.
So do you think you could at least put up some sort of fencing or something so that there's no machinery?
Oh, absolutely.
Going in that
Yep.
area or whatever?
Yeah, that could be part of the construction phasing plan.
There's also a bunch of cross easements and things like that that are needed for this project, so that,
Right, for utilities as well as access.
well, yeah, for access for sure, I didn't think about the utilities, but.
Yep.
So where are you with DPW then in the parking spaces in the front?
Well, we're either going to comply with DPW, in which case he'll greenlight us to amend the plan so that he'll finish reviewing the comment on the drainage, or we'll put him in the back, in which case there's no issue.
I think that,
So we're not gonna
the
fight.
latter one is the right answer
Yes, that'll
to
be
that
the key
question.
one. If for some reason it can't work, we'll be working with staff.
I have faith in you.
All right. We will work that way, in which case DPW should be able to continue its review. So I think at this point, we need obviously to keep this open so that we can go
Yes,
for the
we-
variance of the driveway.
You're going to need to give us an extension.
Sure.
Well, you've obviously got to go to ZBA whenever they're going to
Whenever
get
the
you
snow
on, so.
stops, exactly.
You've got a lot of time to get all these other changes made.
It's amazing how they work it so that they can get so many Wednesdays off.
Mrs. DeLuca, I just want to make sure we've got, understand. We've done a lot of talking about actually the site plan, but we have a subdivision in front of us as well. I don't
We
know. if
zipped
we-
right through the site plan. We did right through the site plan. He told us it was a good plan, so.
Okay, so we have no issues discussing all three applications at the same time, right?
Well, we didn't really say that because the other two are in the public hearing.
Which we
So
haven't
we didn't
opened.
take any
Okay.
record of it.
So we can hold this one open and then
Well,
open and then continue the other ones.
Yeah, I just would say that, just,
The only one we need the extension on is a subdivision.
Subdivision.
That we've opened, we haven't opened the other two,
But
so
the
let's
other,
wait.
the other two are 4-3, and I don't think you're going to get to ZBA before 4-3, so you could
No,
either.
but that's just a must open.
it's a must
Right, but I'm
open, but
saying,
we'll
so
need an
you-
extension.
Right, but the question was, do we even need to open? So I'm saying, if you open them, at least then you get yourself 35 days right there, or you could give an extension to open and not
Either,
open them at all.
we know what you're looking for in those two plans, so whatever's your pleasure. It doesn't,
You know, I would suggest to you that you give an extension to open and we not open them only because we don't know when you're gonna get on their agenda.
Exactly.
They're so backed up.
Why I
Yep.
agree.
Yeah,
okay, that makes sense.
that's what
I
you were
was
trying to say.
saying,
Yeah.
why even open?
Right, I didn't understand that, I'm sorry.
So we have
Does
direction.
anybody want Mr. Bauer to explore the idea of the tree wells in the open space? Or did you just want the more detailed planting
I
plan?
think we do want a detailed planting plan, and wherever possible, especially in that open space, to save the trees that are there.
Yeah,
We'll
well, we
definitely
never
explore,
got-
as part of the grading and planting, we will
Yeah.
address that.
We never got comments from conservation, so maybe if you can get ahead of that.
Especially the 12-inch that's up against the rock wall, would probably be easy to save.
Yeah, we could feather around that one, because we're gonna,
Also, the 16-inch that's by the utility pole, probably you could say.
Mhm.
I understand that in that way you could actually make the retaining tree wells tie into the rock face,
Mhm.
make it look natural, and then, because I understand you're trying to raise the grade back there, which would make it more,
harmonious. and-
Raising the grade and so forth, how does that do anything with the drainage plan, or was that already in the
Nope.
plan?
What we had shown with that grade is that it was the maximum amount without causing a backup onto the neighbor, because that scar kind of was over there, so we can't exceed the neighbor to the.
Because normally you don't
east.
like to pitch water towards a building.
Right, so that will wind up with kind of
Yeah,
a
swale
shallow
or
swale,
something.
but by either feathering the grade or, as Mr. Fox suggested, stepping it up against the wall, there's a million ways we can look at it.
Any other comments from the commission? Any comments from the public? See, I didn't forget it this time. All right, then we'll leave this open.
All right?
We are now opening the public hearing. Okay. And items number 8, 257 Bruce Park, and items number 9, 257 Bruce Park, will not be open this evening. We are ready for item number 10.
Mrs. DeLuca.
So this is a proposal from staff to eliminate the existing language of 6-194, the location of alcoholic establishments, and to simplify the language as it is written. And effectively, the primary change is to eliminate the restriction that establishments with liquor permits are a certain distance away from each other in the CGBR and the CGB zone. So just for the purpose of the record, I might as well just quickly read it if that's okay. 6-194A would read, establishments selling or distributing alcohol under all permit types defined by the Liquor Control Act are restricted as follows. 1, public areas of an establishment distributing alcohol under a restaurant or tavern permit in the CGBR and CGIO zones are restricted to the ground floor of the building, parentheses, see section 6-103.1B, end parentheses. Number 2, cafe permits are prohibited in every zone. Number 3, club permits are permitted for nonprofit clubs only. All other club permits are prohibited. Number 4, package store permits are regulated through the Department of Consumer Protection. As you saw in the staff report, the department did hire Fitzgerald and Halliday to do a parking study to see if there would be any impact in the downtown area if this were to be approved, because the idea being that it's likely we would get more restaurants, although there are plenty of other types of establishments that may want liquor permits, and as you saw in the report, there's salons and things like that. And part of the idea behind looking at this in the first place was due to the national trend of the change in the retail environment, nationally speaking. So when you research it, and the idea that brick and mortar is now potentially not as marketable as it once was because of things like Amazon and more online shopping. The idea is, well, what can we do to counter that? And one of the primary things is what's called experiential retail. So in other words, more experienced type of shopping environments as opposed to just coming in, buying something and leaving. And in talking to a lot of brokers in the area, they've told us that sometimes that kind of experiential retail does warrant alcohol, for lack of a better way of putting it. And would it be possible to reduce those restrictions? So that's how the whole thing started, with kind of looking at the national retail trends, looking at some of the potential impacts on parking. Did you want to say something?
Well, I did want to say something to that. I mean, as regarding, in those situations, they are not restaurants. So we're only doing this for restaurants, I thought.
Well, no, there are other establishments that might want to get a liquor permit. I'll just give an example.
Well,
Say-
it says establishments selling and distributing as defined by the Liquor Control Act. And I don't think these things you're talking about would be necessarily controlled by that, would they?
Because they wouldn't be charging. You know, salons and stuff like that aren't gonna be charging, so
Well,
it's
no,
not,
They don't need
they
a
could,
permit.
though.
they don't need a permit, though.
So this,
Well,
but
they
I'm
do
just saying,
have permits. They do have permits. If you look at the report, let's see. That was part of what Fitzgerald and Halliday had looked at.
My other question, right now, we have restaurants that have liquor permits on the second floor.
Right.
So how does that affect
Well, those are
that?
grandfathered.
Right, but
We
how
can't-
did they get them?
Who knows? Because I think second floor dining only came, I think it's only been around for about 20 years, and a couple of them I know got in,
Gaia, is it still called Gaia, the one that was?
No, but
Gaia?
I'm thinking of the farm-to-table one that's on the second floor.
Back 40 Kitchen,
Back 40, but what was that before Back 40?
it was an Indian restaurant,
yeah.
and it
Right.
had liquor then,
Chola, I
too.
think it was.
It
was
did.
Chola, and it
Right.
had
I
liquor
think
then.
because our office was right across the parking lot from that, and they, I
Okay.
think when that went in, that's when the regulation changed.
Right.
And the other one, which is down the street a bit, I don't know what it is right now, but it's got the Guastavino arches in it.
I agree. I
Been
think
there.
this second floor thing
Gaia?
is going to be an issue.
In terms of that it's too restrictive, you mean?
I think it's too restrictive, and also I think later on, we're going to think of something down the road that's in the zone that's going to anticipate restaurants on a second floor. So I think that my concern is the second floor. I'm all for this, but the second floor seems like we're,
I mean, one thing to think about there is that the only use you can have on the third floor is residential.
I
So if you've
understand
got
that.
2 floors of restaurant, as opposed to having 1 floor of restaurant, let's just say, and then an office or something on the second floor, or a retail store on the second floor.
I mean, do you know the reason that the dining was taken off the second floor?
Well, Fitzgerald Halliday recommends against it. They think that that makes sense, and I didn't,
To what?
to keep it
Keep that.
prohibited.
Okay.
In the study, they recommended, if you look at the study findings, it's one of the things that they conclude. What I would say is, let's deal with the second floor when we need to deal with the second floor. Let's open the gate now, and then when the second floor comes up, we'll accommodate it. Because
And in-
we've been talking about this for a long time. Let's get
no, I
it done.
agree.
And just to do
Totally,
it-
I was just asking
Yeah,
about the second
I-
floor.
and
In terms of opening the gate, as you know, you've removed the restrictions first in the LB and the GB, and then in the LBR, and really not much has happened as a result.
Well,
And I
that's the
did-
thing I wanted to have you say out loud. So after we make this amendment, will we have liquor restrictions anywhere in town in terms of distance?
No.
In terms of distance,
In terms
no.
of
In terms of
distance,
distance,
no.
there will be, so all restaurant establishments that wish to apply for a liquor serving permit will be able to do so throughout town.
Right, and the only place that you
Well-
cannot do that now, which is what we're proposing to change,
Is
is
the
in the
CG.
downtown area, CGBR and
Exactly.
CGB.
So, because we got a comment this week, we got a write-in comment from someone who said that after we eliminated the LB and the LBR, they had not seen permits to some of those small restaurants that are in
Well,
those.
That's obviously their
The
choice.
Fat Poodle,
At that point.
the Fat
Right.
Poodle started serving liquor instead of beer and wine. I think,
But see, they didn't even have, a lot of these places can't serve beer and wine either. And so they didn't even go to beer and wine. So the comment we got this week was that it may not be widely known that people can get.
Most business owners know what's going on.
The other
I
thing
don't
that I
think
just
they
want to
are.
note for the record is I did send this amendment, of course, as we do with all of them, to the Western Council of Government. They had no comment, they didn't think there was any intermunicipal issues. And I did, as part of just the research on this, contact the other towns within Fairfield County and did essentially a poll to see who had done this and who hadn't. And what was interesting was that several towns have eliminated their distance requirements within the downtown and said it's been nothing but very positive outcome for their downtowns.
I did just see something in here that you can't, if, say the a theater in town wants to sell liquor,
Right.
it can't, because it cannot get a restaurant permit, because you need to serve full meals to get a restaurant permit.
Well, we're
It
waiting.
cannot get a
Well,
cafe
that's-
permit, because they're not allowed anywhere.
Well,
So the
we're-
only permit it could get would be a tavern to serve beer
Why
and
don't-
wine.
Well,
Their
they-
attorney is
Their
here,
attorney is
so
here.
But
let's.
no, not a theater, but say a salon wants to sell.
So they can't.
they can just not charge. And
Well-
that's,
The only way it would work is they'd have to
They
give
just
it
don't
away
charge.
because they don't fall into any of those categories.
Well, there may be some, like, Andy was saying, there may be some entity that comes along that wants to sell.
Well, anybody can put forth an amendment to the regulations if they wish. I mean, if they want to do it that way, or they could bring it, you know.
Okay. I'm sure we could do this piecemeal, and if they have a good idea.
we're
Well,
not-
to
we're
the
not doing
point,
it
the point that you're raising, there's a letter from an attorney that raises some of these issues about the cafe permit as it relates to theater, but you're
Other-
talking about other uses
Other
other than
uses.
theater also.
Like, for example, if the senior center up on the second floor, they have play readings sometimes at noon.
Right. Maybe they want to serve something.
Maybe they want to serve something
Right.
there.
So if you wanted to make a change of
Is
that
that
nature,
is-
then we'd have to send it to Westcog again and have it come back to a subsequent meeting.
Because of those,
Just saying.
okay, the senior centers are in their own zone. Because you wouldn't be able to do this, I don't think, in a residential zone. So I don't know what zone the senior centers are in.
Well, the one where the,
Agnes Morley or?
no,
which one?
Allianz Francaise, the
Arch
one
Street?
that's in the old town hall building?
Right, the old town hall where the senior center, the Greenwich Arts Council, that building.
I mean, that was just for example, but
I think if we can actually stick with what we have in front of us now, I think actually taking a look at, expanded uses, if you want, the second floor uses, that kind of thing. I would think actually if we kind of take a really good concerted look at second floor restaurants, it might be beneficial for us in downtown in some.
Maybe. But it might not be, because the parking study that we did right now recommended that we had sufficient parking for the demand and recommended we maintain the prohibition on the ground floor. So it would be
On
prudent
the
of us.
upper floor.
Maintain the prohibition on the second floor. It would be prudent of us to do another study if we decide to expand the uses.
I think where we're heading with just what's in front of us, I think actually may open up
Yes.
farther
Could be.
up Greenwich Avenue, which is actually would be beneficial to us.
Let's get this done.
Yep.
Okay, any other comments from the commission? Any comments from the public?
Doors open.
Doors open. What did he say, that you were older, Mr. Tessie? Did he actually say that?
You don't know how many things he tells you that aren't true.
So we're not to believe anything he says? Is that it?
Never believe anything I say, Bruce has got you.
Did you make your flight 2 weeks ago?
I did. Last flight out of Westchester. Can't you tell? The only comment I have is this, because I'm not fully understanding what you're saying. John Tessie, representing myself.
So you come here tonight unprepared?
I come here,
Okay, well, you can't talk a whole long time then.
no, I'm not. No, what I want to do is point something out to you.
Okay.
The only regulation we have in Greenwich pertaining to the service of liquor is section 6194 that we're talking about tonight,
Exactly,
to my knowledge.
yes.
That regulation is a prohibitory regulation. It's not a permissive regulation.
Exactly.
So anything you don't prohibit is permitted. You've been speaking about establishments, you've been speaking about the theater. They may qualify for various permits under the state regulations. In fact, I know they do. You're not prohibiting that, because you're talking about,
Yes, we are.
Yeah, well, you
No,
say
you're not.
nothing on the second
We didn't
floor.
care- we
no,
didn't-
forget the second floor. Aside from the second floor,
We're also prohibiting cafe.
no, I know what you're prohibiting. I'm
Right.
just pointing out there are other types of licenses, such as salons.
Sure.
You're not prohibiting.
No.
Right? The only issue you would have is on the second floor in those two particular zones only.
And additional cafe permits.
Well, cafe permits, I'm not talking about that. You prohibit certain things.
Prohibited.
Right, they're prohibited. But others, because you were talking earlier about the issue of salons or any establishment on the first floor can have any permit that's allowed.
Right.
And in other zones,
Well, it would
And the
have to be
first and second floors, they are allowed.
it would ha-
You know, okay, because that's not the impression you were leaving, at least to me. Now, just make one other comment. One of the reasons you're not seeing a lot of changes in the other zones is simply because a lot of these establishments are not restaurants that like to serve. And for a restaurant, conversion from a retail to restaurant,
Right.
you have parking issues.
Yeah.
You have parking issues.
So that's what I was thinking.
That's really the issue. You're not going to solve it today. You're not going to maybe solve it tomorrow. But I just want to make the point, that's why you're not seeing a lot.
Right.
You just don't have that many restaurants having that many seats. To qualify both for a state liquor license, which you do need 20, at least 20 seats,
Right.
and you do need at least 400 square feet. Anyway, those are just comments.
Right.
I don't know if you had any questions, but,
Other than that, are you opposed to this?
no,
or are
I'm
you in
fully
favor
supportive.
of
I've
it
been
or
supportive
of it?
for years. I don't think it's going to matter that much because there are a lot of landlords on the avenue who just won't have a restaurant as a tenant.
Right.
But to the extent that it helps, I think it's important. Katie, recognize the change in basically the living patterns of people, and that's good. I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Okay.
Or as you heard before this evening, it's a good plan. Bruce Cohen and I represent Greenwich Plaza. Greenwich Plaza, specifically that portion of Greenwich Plaza that's the retail area north of the railroad tracks, which includes a number of retail shops, the railroad station, and a movie theater. Movie theater is operated by Bowtie Cinemas, who operates a number of theaters around the area. As you may know, certainly as Mrs. DeLuca knows, the theater and in fact the entire retail strip is in need of upgrading, and my clients have been working on an upgrading plan for some time. It's advanced to some degree, to a degree that we were willing to discuss it with the town planner in any event. And a key component is upgrading the theater. The theater, in many respects, needs to be upgraded. Bowtie Cinemas is willing to participate. It's been cooperating with Greenwich Plaza in the plans to rehabilitate the entire north side, and it's an important component of that effort. One of the possibilities would be to relocate the theater to a second floor venue. A very important element for Bowtie or for any modern movie exhibitor is to have an upgraded theater operation which has larger, more comfortable seating, food and beverage service, and the beverage service includes alcoholic beverages. Although everybody that I know would be in support of the approach to eliminate distance limitations on the liquor establishments, as Mr. Fox mentioned, there's an unintended consequence in this particular case, and I've indicated that in a letter that we wrote last week to the commission, which was supported by a letter from the CEO of Bowtie, namely, first of all, the second floor location. Secondly, the kind of permits that theaters who operate this sort of upgraded theater obtained from the State Liquor Authority is a cafe permit. And it's a cafe permit because of the nature of the definition of cafe versus restaurant. And it's tied into the degree in which food service is provided. For a restaurant permit to be issued, there must be hot meals regularly offered. A cafe must offer food service, but it may be sandwiches, salads, and that sort of thing. And so in all of the cases in Bowtie's experience, and they have two theaters similar to the one that they've been proposing for Greenwich Plaza in Norwalk. They've all the nature of the permit that they've received from the state is a cafe permit. Now, the state treats that kind of cafe permit a little differently from the ordinary cafe permit in that there is no bar seating permitted in a theater. And so that is the big difference between what we may be thinking of as a cafe in its ordinary operation and a theater's cafe.
Does
permit.
it have a, does a cafe in a theater have a different designation or a different?
To my knowledge, it's a cafe permit with conditions. In other words, the permit is a cafe permit, so that would be prohibited under this new regulation.
Right.
But it has conditions, and the chief one that I am aware of is the fact that you may not belly up to the bar. In other words, the bar is for service.
So what
Yeah, the letter that we got from Bowtie,
doesn't specify, or yours are not that specific?
excuse me,
Sorry.
quite specific. It says the Bowtie Cinema Ultimate Concept is what they are proposing. Features reserved luxury reclining seating, recliner seating in all auditoriums, and then the key phrase, as well as theater service of elevated full meal food and liquor offerings. Full meal, that's not a restaurant?
I think that's a definitional issue. I happened to go online to see what they were serving at the Bowtie Theater in Sono, which is the kind of theater that they've been talking about. And I'll give it to you because it's not what I would call, hot meal service. It's sandwiches and salads, sort of thing. Could I ask you to share that? It all looks pretty good to me.
I went to one of these theaters in Naples, and in that theater, they actually had a full stand-up bar in the lobby. So patrons waiting for a show could sit in comfortable chairs, have a glass of wine or a beverage
At a table.
at a table and a stand-up bar.
Yeah, in Connecticut, the stand-up bar is not allowed.
Even
At
in
least
the
not
lobby?
Yes, not in the theater permits. In any event, the kind of permits that Bowtie's gotten in their 3 theaters have been cafe permits. So if this were enacted the way it reads, we would have the unintended consequence, or perhaps the intended consequence, of not allowing Bowtie to do the kind of upgrading that they would like, and that would probably prevent Greenwich Plaza as the landlord from upgrading
But
that
I don't know
center.
why this meal service wouldn't qualify. Why wouldn't this qualify as a restaurant?
Why it doesn't, I think you'd have to ask the folks at the state, but basically, when they talk about a restaurant permit, they talk about
I mean, post-pizza.
it must have a diversified selection of food
Yeah.
typically consumed using a knife and fork.
So if you eat the pizza with your hands,
I eat it
You
with
can't
my
do it?
hands. No.
Pizza
Richard
post
doesn't.
is
They don't
gone.
You're serving mac and cheese. You're not eating that with your hands.
Spoon.
Okay, but
All I can tell you is the experience of our tenant, which is Bowtie, who has the best of experience, is that the only kind of permit that the state has allowed them is a cafe permit. Now, the kind of amendment that I suggested is highly limited, really, to a theater operation.
No, I know that, but you do use the word cafe, and you do then modify the thing by permitting cafes, and you're saying that the cafes that are being discussed here or thought about have restrictions or something like that the state.
The restriction about service at the bar.
Well, I think if we were going to try I don't think we can incorporate anything in this thing without going back to Westcog and the
Right.
whole thing. So maybe what you should do is try to find out what the language is on a cafe with conditions. What does that mean? Because
Right.
to talk about the unintended consequences of opening up the whole idea of cafe is another study, but it's not germane, I think, to what we're trying to do here.
Exactly.
So if we can find what conditions are appropriate, because again, I think the letter certainly led me to believe that this was going to be a restaurant. When you
Yeah.
talk about full meal service,
I believe you had
so,
someone attend the staff meeting yesterday, and we made that, during the briefing, we made that point, that as far as we saw it, as long as the theater had the full menu that it had, that it would be a restaurant, and therefore was not requesting it would be okay to take out cafe from your proposed amendment.
just stick a dessert on these things and you're all right, when you got the full meal.
Our information comes from Bowtie, who's the only people that we know that have had direct contact with the state. And, but I do hope that you can take that further and find out.
So does Bowtie have a kitchen, or is it just like some way to warm this food up?
It sounds like it's a warming kitchen.
Right, okay, so I think that.
No pizza ovens?
So here's the question. Could they
Well,
just-
you know, I'm not an expert in liquor law. However, I did take a little time to look up a few of the rulings of the authority.
Later, just like we just
And
did.
they specifically have ruled that having a hot dog steamer, a sandwich warmer, did not qualify as a restaurant. That is a cafe. A cafe must have food service, but this is the kind of food service that
Well-
qualifies as a cafe.
What I would suggest to the commission is that we go ahead with what we have as it's worded now, that wording be developed with staff to amend this regulation as appropriate for theaters afterwards. We're doing that with the HO tonight, we approved it, and now we're simplifying how fractions are done in it. And so we did that, what, a month ago? Not even.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it just about the
Haven't done it
theater,
yet.
or is it, because someone else mentioned about second floor in general? We've had another comment about cafes in terms of dance club type of
I
thing.
have a
so-
feeling that's going to be a much longer study to do that.
Right.
So why don't we either do what Margarita says, or I think you're saying that we would certainly be open to a tighten up what
like-
you want to do on this for the theaters,
In other words,
because
sorry.
it's,
I agree with her. I think actually we can move ahead on this and get our initial regulation rolling. I think actually what we're kind of cutting the line between what the state considers cafe, what we consider cafe, a restaurant, that kind of definition issue. Looking at the menu you've provided, you're real close on that in terms of, I think, what we would say what a restaurant is. And I would think like in any regulation that we work on or amend, that we understand that actually they should be fluid and that we have the opportunity to come back and we must go back to take a look at them.
The reason I gave you
There's no
that.
alcohol served at this
Say it again?
There's no alcohol at this theater?
Yes, there is. That's the reason I gave it to you.
I
That
didn't see it on
restaurant,
I didn't see it on it's another sheet of paper?
it's another sheet, yeah.
But what about the comment about being on the second floor?
Same thing.
Don't we have to address that as
Right.
well as the menu?
We need tighter wording from you. My take is, I really would like to be supportive of what the bow tie's trying to do. So the wording that's being proposed does not, I don't think it's there yet, but we would like to be supportive, and I was suggesting that the commission go ahead and adopt the resolution as originally proposed. You come in a couple of weeks or whenever is appropriate with what will work, what exactly will work, trying to avoid this cafe issue, because it opens a door that we don't want to open, and that's the problem. We've got to find a way to have it only be theaters and cinemas.
To find a way that it only be.
Only that we would.
Not only.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Albin, let me read you the language that I proposed. Subsections A1 and 2 of this section 6194, that's the one that relates to no cafe permits and no second floor, shall not apply to theater or cinema uses, which as an ancillary use may sell or distribute alcohol to patrons under a cafe or restaurant permit. Such alcohol may be served at any floor of the theater. So it's highly limited to a theater use. It has no application to
But the
anybody
pro-
else.
Well,
Go ahead. I'm with you, so go ahead.
the cafe permits in this regulation change is right above what the section you want to add says are prohibited in every zone. And then you go to this subsection and you say, well, no, we don't really mean that. So I think there is a better way to do it. I hope there's a better way to do it because it's,
We discussed this yesterday, and that's exactly what we said at the briefing yesterday, that this wording opens up the cafe permit. So there's got to be a way that our esteemed land use attorney can find a path to making it work.
Well,
Because we want to meet you halfay. We
at
would
your-
like, I
we-
would like to meet you halfway. I'm sorry, I can't speak.
I hope you meet me all the way, actually,
No, I don't
Mrs.
think so.
Albin. No?
Some other lifetime.
Since this was the first and only opportunity for public comment, I don't think that what happened yesterday has a lot of weight. But let me just also point out to you that this proposal, it comes from staff. Are you suggesting that?
to add this in, this language to permit this on the theater?
No,
Oh.
that's my language.
Oh,
The
that's what I
basic
thought.
proposal is
Yes.
a staff
I
proposal.
understand that, yes.
I'm not clear about what you're suggesting that I do. You're going to propose to adopt this tonight, and then I work with staff to change that language? Is that right?
Yes.
What about the second floor? Is there a similar concern about going to the
I don't know
liquor
if, I
control?
don't know if there's, I don't think it's specifically prohibited to have a theater on the second floor. It'd be a matter of egress, and so, I mean, but
Not
that's
only is
a-
it not prohibited,
It is prohibited?
It's
no,
not.
no, not only is it not prohibited, but many years ago, I came before this commission, and
Yeah.
you agreed that I could add, or that this theater could add a
They already
second
got
floor.
it, yeah.
Right.
Well, they got it, but they never exercised it, so it's gone. So, but at that time, you felt that we could have a theater on the second floor.
No, I don't think that anybody here is,
Just don't open the door to cafe permits. That's the thing that we don't feel this is tight enough.
I understand that. But what about the second floor?
not an
For
issue.
what, theaters?
For your
As
use.
far as I'm concerned, it's not prohibited. It is not
Not in a
prohibited.
No, but it
is-
is with the restaurant.
Oh, yeah, but that's the different thing, but the actual having the theater on the second floor is.
It's
is
not an
permitted.
issue, but he's saying,
But
The-
how about this kind of theater that wants to have this sort
We're
of operation?
saying, I think what we're saying as a commission is that we are sympathetic to that. We are not in agreement with the technical way that's structured and put into this regulation. So if we pass this tonight, we are open to hearing an amendment to it.
And-
My-
And what, I think staff understands what we're trying to say.
We're supportive
And
of it.
we can't say in one thing, all cafe zones prohibited are in every zone, and then in the next text line, say it's prohibited in a theater on the second floor.
We might be
We have to
able to,
find some way, it's not nice, it's not correct.
We
It's not a
may-
correct way.
excuse me, we may be able to take the cafe permit definition and make it more restrictive than the state's definition. Then we
That
could
would-
keep
I was
the,
just going to suggest that what.
Or put in a new definition, cafe theater.
What I could do is work with the state and
Yeah.
with Mr.
Right.
Cohen, and then I could submit the application back to you.
That's fine.
That's what we
So I
want.
just, and I
okay.
think that's where
That's where
what you
Mr.
were
Cohen's
asking,
going.
right.
This is staff,
So as
but
long as the commission's okay with that.
Yeah, we
it's-
need input from the applicant, this applicant, but
Speaking of the applicant, could I ask you to listen to my client, Darrell Harvey, who's the CEO of Greenwich Plaza?
Sure.
Thank you. Just another concern that Bowtie has, that apparently, technically, if they have a restaurant permit versus a cafe permit, you're not supposed to have people, children who are under 21 unaccompanied, which starts affecting whether they technically should be having them come into their movies. That's the way it's written, and that's one of the way the liquor. It's not really,
So what do you do?
and it's not really an issue that is going to be enforced, but they'd prefer to be 100% compliant. It can't affect their movie business. And we could get more from them on this issue, but there is a particular reason for that it could affect the movie business that they're concerned about, and they don't want to raise this for everybody else.
No, but I
that's-
thought that was particularly with a bar.
Yes, because of-
Because I know a child under 21 is not allowed in a bar without their parents. Does not affect a restaurant per se.
so they would have to have the bar separate in a separate area and all that.
Well,
It does
Mr. Cohen
apparently.
said they weren't having a bar.
No, if it's a cafe and they want to still have people who are under 21 come in, so it's an issue they're just technically concerned about.
So
And it's
you guys-
specific to them, and so I just wanted to get that point out, that just eliminating the cafe permit for them could cause a problem for them in operating their business. And maybe that's what you want to discuss further, and you could have language
I think that can be discussed with
specifically
staff
on both
and-
the cafe thing and the second floor.
Yeah,
Just separately, I understand your concern that you don't want it to say one thing, then an exception.
Right.
Maybe it says nothing on the second floor except for the theater, and
We'll
maybe
have
it
to-
says
we'll
no
have to
no
find a way
cafe
around
except
that or
for
something. Yes.
a theater for serving. But that was another concern that they wanted
Yeah.
to make you aware of.
Okay, thank you.
So,
No.
if I may, Mr. Maitland, what I'd like to do, subject to whatever you finish doing tonight, is to see if we couldn't put the right person at the Liquor Control Authority in touch with Katie, and see if we can't work out some acceptable language.
Well, if we should approve this, that we're going to close this, and if we should, and I'll see if there's any other public testimony. Is there any other public testimony on this? Want to close it?
Yes.
Please. Okay. Item number 11, again, the planning and zoning staff.
This is a quick little change to what you changed for the historic overlay regulations in January of this year. There was a word that got, two words actually, that kind of came over from the last language that I think should be removed, which is the words excluding fractions. I'm in section 6-109D, number 3, where it talks about for structures in the RA 4, 2, 1, 20, 12, 7, and the RA 6 zones. The commission may authorize additional dwelling units in existing buildings or structures and/or new construction that is complementary and secondary to the historic structures, provided the total number of units shall not exceed the density determined by dividing the total lot area by the minimum lot size for the underlying zone and multiplying the result. And then I'm proposing excluding fractions by 1.5 in the RA 4, 2, 1, 20, and 12 zones, and by 1.2 in the R7 and R6 residential zones. So once I realized that that had been included in there in error, I also thought that we should eliminate the sentence in that same paragraph that reads, "The difference between density permitted in the underlying zone and the density permitted using the multiplier is the number of bonus units," because I feel like that kind of adds this added question of whether there's an additional calculation or not, so I think it's just cleaner to remove that sentence. So in other words, once you do the calculation, if you end up with 2.3 units, let's say, then one knows that it's 2.3, and you can kind of round it up to 3, assuming the commission would be in agreement with that, and obviously then you would have the set of standards in the same section.
It just
to
leaves the
use.
discretion, though, to the commissioner, says
Exactly.
it may round up, so
Exactly,
change, yeah.
right.
Okay.
Okay.
Any comments from the commission?
Sounds good.
Any comments from the public? All right, this one's closed. Number 12, CRK LLC for an amendment to the zoning map. Katie, do we want to do these separately or do them combined?
I think it's better to do them combined. Obviously, the vote will be separate findings,
Right.
but I think since they're so intertwined, it does make sense to do a combination.
Whoops.
All right,
Okay.
is that okay?
Oh, sure, that's fine.
Okay, so we're going to be then opening up item number 12, which is an amendment to the zoning map, and item number 13, which is a final coastal site plan and special permit.
Right. Okay, John Tessie for the applicant, CRK LLC. I'm here with Mr. Rick Crowell, as I think you've all seen. You've seen us together with respect to prior applications on this property. Hopefully, we're finally at a point where we have total consensus among the HDC, the commission, and Mr. Growell to move this project forward. Oh, just to digress to the previous application,
It's closed.
I know, but I just want to tell Katie, Richard Mindek is the person you want to speak to at the liquor control.
Thank you. I thought you meant to the HO. I was like, what?
No, Richard Mindek.
Oh, thank you.
He's a good guy, and he's the keeper of the gate there.
Okay.
And I was at the Silver Spot in Naples Sunday night, and I did have a drink.
Was it on the second
Beer.
floor?
They're very comfortable seats.
Comfortable seats. They bring actually the food and the liquor right to the seats. I'm not trying to give Mr. Crowell any ideas, but
A lot of restaurants do that.
I'm behind the times.
Bring the food and the
I-
liquor
to
to
the
kind of
seats.
wherever you are.
I do. Anyway, I could talk more about the previous application, but not on Mr. Crowell's dime. So, but I wanted to give you that information on Mr. Mindek. So the first application we have before you in terms of your calendar call is the application to change the subject property to the, what would be the R7-HO zone under your newly or recreated section 6109 of the zoning regulations. The principal purpose, as noted in the staff report by Mr. LaRoe for this application, interestingly, is to allow the commission, in its discretion, to permit the special exception use of the property as a not-for-profit club. The specific purposes, as noted in the application, the site plan application, has to do with the utilization of a club by members of the Greenwich Water Club, but it's standalone in terms of meeting the zoning regulations. Greenwich Water Club.
Will the water club end up owning this?
No, the Greenwich Water Club, as is the case across the street at 49 River Road, is a tenant. It has a lease with the underlying owner of the property, a long-term lease. And that was actually discussed years ago when we were talking about that property. And of course, you have on that property at 49, combination of business buildings separate from the water club, which operate Beacon Point Marine, and then you have certain of the facilities leased by the Greenwich Water Club, specifically the front building where we have the dining facilities, the clubhouse building, and then right behind it, the building that was the subject of an application that you basically approved or modified last month, where we have the boat storage, or skull storage, and the training facilities on the second floor.
So what are the?
I'm just sort of curious whether, I guess I just asked the question, you'll say yes, but is it legal to create an HO zone tied as much as it is to the water club in both and it's based on a lease as opposed to ownership?
It's nothing to do, well, let me answer it for you this way. Ownership is not the issue. The use is always the issue. Whenever you make a zoning approval, the use runs with the land itself, but that use has to be complied with. The conditions of a special permit or a site plan approval have to be complied with, irrespective of the owner. It's a question of the use.
So what is the connection then between this site and then the other site? In other words, let's say that the relationship died or whatever, what would be the impact on this property? Or you sold the squash property to somebody. So,
It
in
sells-
other words, this has to be nonprofit on this side. And
The-
then there's components on the other side of the street
Yeah.
that are nonprofit.
I think it's irrelevant.
But so they can be completely severed.
Oh, absolutely. There's no, and we spent time on this when Mr. Crowell was looking at the so-called Peters property. I forget the numbers now, 81, whatever it was.
89.
89. It's close. We spent a lot of time talking about that very subject of that being, again, another property where there would be a lease by the Greenwich Water Club, and it needed to be standalone. And irrespective of who owns it, in that case, there was a long-term lease with the Peters family. It
So
was- it
who
was going to be
owns,
leased.
who actually is the leaseholder, if you will? Like, who owns that?
The owner of the property is CRK LLC, which is Mr. and Mrs. Crowell's company.
And is that a for-profit company?
Yes.
Well, then I do think that is a question that we should pose to the law department.
What do you mean?
Because you have a for-profit company that owns
Yes.
this operation, and you're leasing it to a not-for-profit. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying I
It's a
do
use-
think we should
it's a
verify
use.
that with the
Well,
law department.
Yeah, there's nothing in the regulations that requires, nor would it be legal for you to require
No,
ownership
I
of a
think-
given piece of property for a specific use.
I think it has to be nonprofit because you're asking us to go into the special exception
Exactly.
part of the regulations
That's
where
the
club use is
Yeah.
nonprofit.
So the question.
The use itself is nonprofit. You know what, and I'll give you, God forbid, sorry, Lord, but the whole point is that, I'll give you a good example of a case, 'cause irrespective of whether it's nonprofit, and that's the Stanwich Church. That's why I say, good Lord. I'm saying this, the use that was applied for, where your decision's pending, was a specific use, okay? And the use was not by a church. The use that was requested was for a not-for-profit that, as you know, to engage in what they call an institutional
Oh,
therapy.
no, we're not going to talk about that.
No, it's very important for you to realize this. Don't shake your head. I'm
Oh, I
explain
will.
something to you. Excuse me.
Excuse-
That's not the point. I'm giving you an example where that was the correct way they did it. I'm not arguing against it. The application was done correctly. The underlying user, let me make the point.
I'd
The
rather-
underlying
I'd-
owner of the property.
Mr. Tessie,
Yes.
I'd rather you did not, because that's a closed item.
It's
which-
not, I'm making an example.
Give us a different example.
Give you an example. Across the street, the Greenwich Water Club. I just gave you that
No,
example.
but the point is.
Property is owned by a for-profit entity. RFK Greenwich Enterprises owns the entire
I
property.
understand that, but what the difference is to me anyway,
Yeah.
is that under the way the regulations are worded under 109,
Yes?
that we are allowed under a special permit to take the role of, if you will, a ZBA, in looking at whether this is a club nonprofit use.
Correct, period.
And you're, all right, is it?
Yes, that's what we're proposing.
If you're telling us that this is not owned by the ultimate user, which is the River Club, is that also
The Greenwich Water Club.
the water club?
Which is a non.
But who owns that? What company owns it?
No company, the members, there's membership interest in it.
All right.
There is no underlying owner of, it's a membership.
I'm sort of very nervous.
It's like who owns Bernie Tree Country Club or who owns Innis Arden Country Club? The answer is they're a nonprofit, non-stock company. There is no stock ownership in not-for-profit, non-stock corporations
Mr.
in
Tessie, I think the
Connecticut.
confusion is that you have the property owner, which is a for-profit.
Yes,
Right.
right,
And you have a tenant
right,
that comes in, that's a nonprofit tenant.
yes.
And I think that's where the disconnect is that we're looking at the property and not a tenant. And I think that's the thing, is that
Yeah,
if
you're
you had a
No.
different tenant, or if the tenant never showed up, or the tenant didn't want the building after it was done, then we're stuck, because now we have
You're
what
not
we're
stuck.
what we're
That happens all the
anticipating
time.
it.
Suppose you approve a car
Right,
dealership,
this
and no
has-
car dealership wants to go to the property.
But they go
Then
to-
you make an application for a different approved use. Why don't you speak to your town attorney about it, because there's a disconnect here.
There is
You
a disconnect
You cannot connect.
because under 694, which is the only way that we
Yes.
can act on this, is all of the club uses are for nonprofit,
Use.
educational nonprofit.
Use. Has nothing to do with ownership. Everything is tied to use. It has nothing to do with ownership. You can talk to your town attorney. It is everything, it has to do with use. The use has to qualify, and the use in that instance has to be, can only be used by a not-for-profit entity. And we would suggest a lease, and there are numerous examples throughout the town, but it's not a debate for me.
Okay,
Well,
that's,
I
It's a
think
matter of law.
The disconnect is, on the club uses, they are also the property owner for a majority of the cases you cited. And if the club leaves, the property is going to be sold to probably another club. Here, you've got a tenant. So the question is, where else can you show me, other than across the street, where a private club is a tenant in an HO zone?
Well, you narrowed
Wait
it
a-
so much
No, but
that's totally irrelevant.
but the other way.
The
to-
bottom line doesn't change. I suggest you talk to your town attorney.
think
You're
so.
going down a road that you don't need to go down. Zoning is tied to use.
Can you,
But the only
That's
thing, the only
simple.
thing would be this, then, if we did approve this as an HO zone, then it
Yeah.
would have to be tied to, only to be used by a nonprofit organization.
Right, and
Well, let's be clear about this. They're two different points. Excuse me, let me make a point.
Yeah.
Let me make this point. Because we're mixing the applications. Let's get them straight. Number one is changing the underlying zoning of this property. Okay, that's number one. Once you've done that, Mr. Corrales put the deed restriction on the property, when the deed restriction primarily, nothing to do with the use, has to do with the facade easement. It's a better phrase. So this is tied up. That, in terms of the building itself, once built out, completed, it's got a perpetual restriction on it, a facade easement. The separate application, now that's zoning, it's set, whether it's HO, whether it's R7, doesn't really matter what it is, but you've locked it up. That's the underlying zoning. You're going to put that deed restriction on the property. The next point is, under the section 6109, this commission can permit uses pursuant to special permit, some of which go beyond the permitted uses. In this particular application, now for the special permit, in site plan approval, we're suggesting that you allow a special exception use. In the future, on this property, whether it's 5 years from now or 500 years from now, because theoretically the building's supposed to still be standing, someone may figure out that squash isn't such a cool idea after all, and someone would come in for an application to this zoning commission, perhaps to do something else. But the only use permitted, because that's the only special permit issue, is one involving the user of the property being a non-for-profit corporation, and is specifically related to this club. That's all I'm trying to say. You just break
Well,
down
it
the
doesn't have to
component
be-
parts.
so Mr. Tessie,
It's not tied to ownership.
Mr. Tessie, I know you stopped me, but believe it or not, hang on to your podium.
You agree with
I'm
me?
agreeing with you,
No, that's fine. Great minds think alike very
Yeah.
often.
hardly ever. But I believe you're right, because I believe that if a for-profit use was to come in, the property would lose its HO, and it would lose the extra.
Well, it would only lose the HO if we made it, it would
be a
only
zone-
lose the
No, the
HO if it
HO
was one of the,
requires-
well,
It would-
the HO would have to require a nonprofit
But
use.
it does, because the HO.
Well, it hasn't yet, but.
No, it does, because it has to be it's what
Would
the
there-
underlying zone.
No,
There'd
for
be a
the
zoning
rezone.
There'd be a zoning violation, as Katie said, there'd be a zoning violation. And I can give you other types of analogies. There are many that you have, and I give you, for instance, a car dealership. Doesn't matter what it is. The bottom line is, someone cannot operate a car dealership without getting a state license,
So-
period.
what is a nonprofit use, if you could just define that?
There's there's difference from a church, a club. There's this very specific IRS regulation of the state, and it has a lot to do with how many outside people use it? So clubs are
Yes,
keeping.
you're very limited.
Very limited.
You have your experience. I know
The
it's Stan-
revenue
Stan was-
can't exceed
yes.
15%
You
of.
can't go outside, right. There are
Outside of-
limitations where you would lose your,
And so you
Club
file
status.
your,
Yes.
No,
you have to file your annual statements as a club to show that you qualify. You have both state and IRS restrictions.
and so how many of the nonprofit uses are on the other property again?
One, Greenwich Water Club,
Which is the rowing thing, right, or no?
which is the rowing,
Right, the restaurant?
boating, and the
Boating
clubhouse,
as
the
in
clubhouse.
marina?
No, I'm saying they have boaters are members of the club,
Oh, I
but
see,
it's a
okay.
not-for-profit club.
Gotcha, okay.
Remember, we talked about that, there were both boaters and rowers that could go into the club, and there was a limit on the number of members.
Clubs have to be a club, you have to have members.
But why
Different
do-
classes, and you're technically not open to the public, so.
You can't be open
unlike
to the
a
public.
fitness club, you can't just go and sign up and become a member.
But
There's
why do you have to have a parent property or parent owner?
Why do you have a parent owner
Yeah, what's,
being in this property?
right, like why would you do that?
Mr. Crow, well, first of all, the Greenwich, we can't transfer it to the Greenwich, we want to transfer it to the Greenwich Water Club, because the Water Club, as I said, doesn't have, the Greenwich, there are a lot of things going on.
Like, do
First of
you-
all, for financing purposes.
But
the-
do you need to do that in this sense so that the members from the Greenwich Water Club can use these squash clubs?
We would,
squash
then you'd
courts,
have,
or-
we wind up having to set up a whole different club to own this, to separate it. There are legal responsibilities. There are a lot of reasons you don't do it. I'm really surprised you're bringing this up, but you're all bringing it up, so we'll talk about it. I think talk to your town
Because
attorney.
It's a special, well, we need you to give us the information to talk to the town attorney about.
Well, that was a
because-
suggestion that
No,
was
I
made.
understand that, but so I just want to make sure I understand this when I talk to the town attorney about it, because if I understand it correctly, you need, or want this not-for-profit to be associated with the not-for-profit across the street, so that the members from across the street are the same members that will use this facility. In other words,
Yes, very good. We're proposing to lease that facility to the Greenwich Water Club for that specific purpose.
okay.
Yes.
And it might be a new class of membership, or.
I don't think that's what you intend, but.
Some people might be squash-only members.
Yeah, some may be, but that's what
It's
you're
like
seeing in different clubs, as you know.
Innis Arden did the same thing for their fitness center. You could be a fitness member if you chose to.
Yeah, and you have various classes, like some country clubs, tennis members only, social members only, golf club member only. I know Mr. Hardman wanted to say something.
My question was, at the end of the lease,
Mhm.
if it ever takes place, could you describe to us what happens if there's not a renewal?
The answer would be, if the Greenwich Water Club were to cease being the occupant of that facility, then it could not be operated as, well, you know what it is. It's a facility designed around, primarily around the squash courts. Then there'd have to be another qualified club, not-for-profit club, that would be the occupant, or an application would have to be made to the zoning commission to propose another use that would be considered by the commission at the time.
But it would have to be a not-for-profit in order to remain consistent
Yeah.
with 694.
No matter what it is,
Allowed
it's like,
So if they wanted to go to a for-profit use, they would lose the benefits of being an HO.
no, more importantly, it's got nothing to do with the benefit of the HO. The point of mine, do you have no, we're still in the underlying R7 zone. A for-profit club is not allowed in
Not
the
allowed.
R7 zone.
Right, only by special.
It's not a matter of losing your HO. In fact, you want the HO to continue as a zoning commission, because you've got your declaration on file.
Right,
So
but if you were to propose a
Yeah.
for-profit use at that site,
you need to change the zoning regulations or get a variance.
or the HO goes away? We asked Katie yesterday, that's why I'm saying that. That's the question we asked.
I don't think the HO goes away. There's
You
no
could
way
put
an
office
HO
use.
zone go,
I asked her yesterday was.
You can put
so-
office use in an HO, and it wouldn't have to go away. It'd still be
No,
an
they
HO.
can't have a for-profit use in
no.
R7.
We're talking about club. An office use is a good point. Someone would come in and make an application to modify the interior. Could be an office use. It could be residential, could be whatever the zoning regulations allow. But your HO zone can't possibly go away unless you wiped it out on the town map.
If you demolish the structure that was the reason for the HO zone in the first place, is what we were talking about yesterday,
Oh,
and of course.
Yeah,
then-
which could only be demolished
No, what I
by
was
approval of the zoning commission.
I was asking you something different. I was asking you, if they changed the use and they wanted a for-profit, whatever, a beauty salon, whatever,
Right.
they would lose the HO.
Well, they couldn't do it. It would be a violation, and they would have to apply for that. They
That's right.
couldn't
If
just,
they got the variance, they would lose the HO.
what variance?
No. HO goes with the property.
No matter what the use
It's in
is.
perpetuity.
In perpetuity.
Unless they demolish it. Okay.
Right.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And
Okay, got it.
so,
Got it.
so they're bound now by the HO
Yeah.
regulations.
So any change of use has to comply with the HO regulation.
I get it.
You know, it's interesting because in this particular application, everything the HO offers, otherwise, Mr. Crowell doesn't need. In theory, we could have gone along with, but as you know, we don't want to, the Board of Appeals approval of the special exception from last year pursuant to a settlement. But in that case, and this is how it all started with you all, we came to you to convert this non-conforming building into actually a conforming use. And the amount of floor area, and we can talk a little bit about the FAR because I do want to get that clarified. But so I think we're under the FAR, even without the 15% bonus, technically speaking. But it doesn't really matter at this
There
particular
may be
point.
some disagreement on that, but okay.
Well, it all gets down to, but anyway, the only point I'm making,
But let's
this
stay on
all
the
started where we were willing to protect this building. We are in the historic
And there
district.
is, as you know, a lot of support for that. even
Yeah, there
the
is.
fact that we got a letter today from the Historic District Commission supporting this.
Right, no, we appreciate it. I think we've all been working together, which is kind of like how I started. So all in all, I think it's a win-win for everybody, and I want you to be comfortable. That's why I only
But
said,
I think we perhaps obviously mistakenly assumed that this was going to be a part of the Greenwich.
it is. But I guess what you didn't realize, and it's been a while since we heard it,
What's the,
Greenwich Water Club.
Water
The
Club,
Water
thank
Club
you.
does not own any of the land across the street. So it's very, and that was discussed 10 years ago or 15 years.
Gee, I
I
lost
forget how long, many years we did that project.
been a long time.
Yeah, but it all comes together and it's all consistent with zoning in there.
So even if, are you going to submit a map for signature of the commission?
We are, and we'll have Regis and me do that.
Couple of things just on the one you've already submitted. It just-
No, we did, go ahead.
Well, that one that you're showing us right now is called the location survey and so
Yes.
forth, and I didn't know if that was going to be submitted.
I think the map, you know, it's interesting because we have a building already on it, but I think the maps we usually submit would be basically not show the land, right? Not show the building.
Just be like the building, the business zone maps.
Yeah, we don't usually show the building on those.
No, you
maps.
just show the lot.
So we show just the lot and we take the building off. That's what we usually do.
And that would be attached to your declaration of restrictions.
But that probably, I mean, do we normally get a map on that for signature?
Not for signature.
Not for signature.
No, but
Just-
for, just as an amendment to the building.
Okay,
and back.
Because the only thing is, there are just some errors on this one map, and so I just was going to mention that.
I think page 269 is the map we're looking for the zoning change.
Yeah, okay. Well, the only thing, I didn't know if the zoning change going to an HO had a different requirement, because that would only occur if you have, you know, something that you're saving. And I did, like I say, I didn't know if that
Yeah.
Katie had a different requirement, and you say it doesn't?
Just the one, like Mr. Mackar said, the one on 269 and
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so are we going to wait to hear something from the town attorney on this?
I think we should.
Okay.
Okay, well, so maybe we just get the floor area straightened out.
Let's do that.
Because I looked at, we counted all the floor area. Is that mic on? I may have shut it off. playing around. Yeah.
We're gonna have a lot of cancer.
No, I thought.
Before we proceed on the FAR, if we can put the first floor plan up, I think it is.
Yeah, I know, but the problem
The first floor or the ground floor?
I think,
I mean, where the entrances are to the,
no, I think it's actually the first floor plan that actually shows the bridge, I guess, or that area above the courts.
The first floor, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
okay.
I think the question was the space that's actually under, the space in the basement that's actually under the connection or the bridge portion that goes from one side of from the existing building across the four,
I think it's,
I'm not following exactly.
What
Here.
he's calling the bridge is the access.
that
You mean the
drawing,
axis.
that drawing is not correct. It doesn't show the middle squash court projecting down. That's an old drawing.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. For the record, Rick Grau. You're right, this is an older floor plan. I may have the newer one in the back here. This one,
That one
with the
show-
foundation plan, is correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Right, I'm
Because
sorry.
the,
So I believe what you're asking for, though, because there's not a huge amount of difference, was just a matter of the access way from the rear of the building through.
leave that up there for a second, because
Okay.
I think that demonstrates what our problem is.
What you're asking for is this, is you're calling the bridge on the main floor?
The point of it is this, the floor space has to be counted somewhere once. Since the squash courts are multiple stories, they're going to have to be counted in your FAR analysis on the basement floor plan as being area. The basement part of the existing house is a basement, because it does have a floor above it. Therefore, that would be discounted by the 50% rule. And the area under that link on the first floor, which is different because yes, that would also have to be, that could be counted as 50% because that does have a floor above. So the basement floor plan, I think, having done my own, but just by scaling and everything, I come up with the floor plan that you've got says it's total of 5631.
Yeah.
I don't think that's correct.
Right.
Because the squash courts of themselves, since they go the 2 stories, I get 3308. The rest, and the building is 5631, so if you take the 3308, subtract that, you're done with 2323. That would go in at half, because that's got a floor above it. So
Yeah.
that truly is a basement.
No, that's what I was saying,
If you add all of that up,
yeah.
if you add all of that up, I come up with the building using all of your other numbers for the thing of 9929.
The way you did it.
The
if you're-
site at .36 only permits 9159. So you do need that 15%.
We need a portion of it. I knew it was going to be reduced. The question was how we were going to count it. You came up with an analysis, which
Yeah, well, the analysis, I think, is
appreciate.
supported by the CEO, because we asked him.
Yeah, no,
'Cause
I
made the
understood.
same mistake the last time of,
What I didn't know, you could allocate it different ways, is that you're going to count it, but I don't have to beat it to death. In other words, something had to be counted down there, but if you're going to say no part of that, it seemed to me at least the footprint had to be counted for
You want-
the squash courts. No, the question was.
but full, no 50%.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
But what
okay.
I'm saying is that if they count in full, but they're also part of the basement, can you exempt more than 50% of that 2,000 or so square feet? And that's not the way you're doing it.
No.
And therefore, I agree with it. I don't have a problem with it. Okay, the only other point I would make, however, theoretically, is that now let it go. You ready?
I'm ready.
Portion of, okay, the greenhouse actually is a floor. So, but I don't think we're going to split hairs. No, I'm saying,
Not
so
very
that,
big.
well, if it is a floor above, then that portion is really a basement. But we're split, we're only
We're not-
talking,
I don't think we're gonna
but I
do
don't
that.
need to go there. It's a couple hundred square feet.
So why don't we'll just be simple
just-
and do it the way I did it?
No, I'm just pointing it out, that I
Yeah.
thought about it too. I get everything you're saying, but
All
I
right.
thought you'd appreciate the fact
I did appreciate that.
Mr.
that
Tessie,
fact.
you brought up the
Let's get
greenhouse.
math right.
We get the
No, but I think-
We're going to be a few hundred square feet over where we need a portion of.
That 15%.
Of the fifth, yeah, it's not going to work out, it's going to work
Now,
out to like
But I have a problem.
4 or 5%.
I have a problem with that 15%, and I need help with it, because no, I'm going to show, I'm doing the language from the
The
HO.
language is a quite unique language.
Yes, it is. So if you go
It's
to-
open to interpretation in our
Well, that's
favor, by
good,
the
because
way.
I hope we can find a positive way to spin it. So let's see if we can. Number 4 of the thing in the 109
Yes.
says, for structures in the RA 4 and 2, let's go, forget that.
I know.
Relevant is the R20, R12, what are we? R7. Okay, so, yeah. And for structures on sites in the RA 1, 20, 12, and 7 residential areas, Planning and Zoning Commission may authorize additional FAR up to 15% in the existing building or structures and/or new construction that is complementary and secondary
Yeah.
to these structures.
Right.
That's good, right? Except, number 5, says for structures on sites in residential zones not more than 1,000 feet from a business zone property line, the Planning and Zoning Commission may authorize all uses permitted by right, special exception, for the most restrictive residential, or restrictive contiguous off residential zone or office use. I need to get to the end of this whole thing. Permitted accessory uses, blah, blah, blah. What I want to get to is this. Height and floor area ratio shall be the same for the pre-existing residential zone. So that kind of conflicts with the one above where it's permitted. And then we sort of say, but in these cases like this one, where we are sort of crossing the street to a business zone and then modifying it, it says, as I read it, the floor area shall be the same as the pre-existing residential use, which kicks us back to the .36. So help me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's,
Wait, to let her read it. Because that, I think, well, let me read it first, because I think that language in 5 is referring to the HRO.
yeah, well, I don't know what it, because it's another, maybe another one of these carryovers.
Yeah, well, that is the language from the HRO, is what's in 5,
Yeah,
where it's 1,000 feet, because this isn't that, that's not what they're doing here. Because the HRO is specific to office use, I think. Let me just read it, sorry.
Okay.
This is under, okay.
see, we're using a special exception for the most restrictive residential use. And that's in, I didn't read that sentence, but go ahead. Did you read it?
I mean, the concept in 4 was for.
No, I know what the concept was, that's what we were
For
trying to
homes.
help
I
people
know,
out.
I know.
And then it seems like it kind of got taken away by
I
5.
mean, I guess one thing you could look at is the fact that they do have housing in this structure. Because that was kind of the point of 4, was to allow, when you had housing, to allow, these bonus units, that you were permitted this extra FAR as an incentive.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think what it says is that the, where is it again? Permitted, okay, the special exception for the most restrictive contiguous residential use or office use, we're not doing that. We're going back to the residential zone. We're keeping it in the R7, and we're permitting it because it's a club use, and that is permitted for nonprofit clubs.
Correct.
So that's the part of it that we're using, and that unfortunately kicks us into this last statement, which is the height and floor area shall be the same as the pre-existing zone, which is the
That
problem.
doesn't make sense, because where's the...
Well, I know it doesn't, but it does,
Well,
that's
that
what,
was, the FAR bonus was supposed to be
yeah,
for
that's to
residential
encourage
homes.
this, or something, yeah,
Well, it was supposed to be for residential homes.
right.
I don't think it contemplated this, but if you want to interpret it that way, then.
Well, it has to be, how else can we do this?
I don't, well, if I may interject, the point, I know where 5 came from, but the point is, the question is, which section controls? And when it comes to your authority to provide additional FAR, it's not as of right. In other words, 5 states, this is what's going, your FAR is the same for pre-existing residential zone. 4, I read to mean, however, in the case where you have an existing structure and/or new construction that is complementary and secondary to historic structures, you may authorize additional FAR. That's totally discretionary. 5 speaks about the as-of-right FAR, 4 speaks about the discretionary FAR.
Katie,
Well,
do you
4
That's the way I read it.
5 is,
Katie, do you agree with what Mr. Tessie just said? 5 speaks of the as of right, and 4 speaks to the discretionary.
I'm going to leave that up to you to interpret.
Well, I think
Interpret it.
we have to go with the
that-
intent
that's the way we-
is to give extra FAR for doing this.
But shouldn't we also?
Could I ask the
I
chairman
think
one
if we're going to
question?
talk to the town attorney, let's just get this clarified.
But we
Mr.
wrote
Maitland,
it.
could I just go
No, I
backward?
understand, but
But-
we're going back to them anyway on this.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we
I
have
don't-
at least,
It cleared up, and it made, why keep bumping up against it? Maybe just, again, I have to modify it.
But why don't, go ahead.
Well,
if you
I
want.
just had one question, is that how, I know you did some gross, rough numbers, but how far was the project over based on your
About
estimate?
700-800 square feet at the end of the day.
So if there's a more exact calculation done, I mean, maybe that can be done, and then we don't have this issue in either case? I'm
No, we're going to be over.
I'm pretty
You think you're gonna
close.
be over no matter what?
We're going to be over by about 5%, I think, something like
Well,
that.
do you, I mean, I guess the question is, how do you feel about it? I mean, this is, how do you want to interpret it?
The
Do you
intent is to
feel?
give people more FAR, and we've got to word this regulation so it does what it's supposed to do.
Right, and
That's
so the question is it was the FAR, and, or do you want to, you don't have
What
to
I
answer
would
this
do
now,
simply
but-
is just strike out that line that says on the underlying zone, because it conflicts with us giving them the incentive
So if
above.
that, right, so if that's what your intent is, then that's,
That would be the simplest
okay,
way to
that's-
correct
yep.
We
what
have
I
to-
think is a
Right.
problem, and you might just mention it to John
Mm-hmm.
and see what he says.
But then we
Right.
need to correct the regulations so that it accomplishes
So that
its
it's clear.
objective.
Right.
Well,
Right.
so that it meets its objective, because otherwise it's gonna kick out some applications that
Right.
would damage some, people that are trying to save a building.
Okay.
All right, well, as Katie said, you're the
We have
boss.
to-
That's what I say,
we
just
can't
take
do
it
the-
out.
We can't do the zone.
That's the simplest way to correct it.
You can just take out that sentence.
I think that's what I said.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess we can do that without talking to the attorney if we want to, but as long as we're talking to him,
Yeah, I mean, you can clarify.
But it's our
something if it's not
regulation,
clear,
so-
but it's your regulation, you can interpret it as you.
That's the easiest thing to do. That way you
Somebody
don't,
else could bump up against the same problem.
somebody could try to use
that
it.
Richard's just
Yeah,
uncovered.
although I think you can interpret it, but I think,
But you don't want
Clean
to
it up.
have it so that everybody.
no argument from me.
You don't want to have it so that everybody's got to scratch their head every time they
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
I mean, the regulations are confusing enough as it is.
So what do we say?
Well, we can't do the HO, so we can't do the site plan.
Well, no, we can comment on it if we got any other comments.
I mean, we can't, yeah.
I think number one,
was just the-
can we make a, well, I'd like to make a comment on the parking because
You did last time.
well, no, I just want to, they're providing 13 cars. There are 3 cars that have to be reserved for the residential, leaving us with 10 cars
Yep.
that can be used for the squash court. The point being on this is the management, you can't have, it's the same thing with, we have these exercise clubs and things like that in these fitness centers. We always want a gap between the people coming in and the people leaving, so they can, shower, change clothes, whatever. So we just need to have something that we're not gonna foul up this parking lot by the 10 spaces that we got.
Yeah.
No, or just have a gap in between the courts.
Well, that's what I'm saying, it needs to be monitored.
But you don't have gaps.
You've got the courts in.
No, but okay, when you finish you have your squash match,
Right, but it's, you get a court by the hour, and so, and
but I'm saying that you can't go 9 to 10 and then the next person come in 10 to 11.
that's how they run them.
Where, they don't, because where do the people park that are there on the court?
I was assuming they're gonna have a cross parking agreement
No.
across the street.
I don't think so, and I don't think they should. I'd rather keep it on this.
Well,
Because we don't know if there's excess parking across the
are they
street to
ever
be
gonna do
used.
tournaments?
We didn't even get to, I didn't think about that. So you
I
can
mean,
ask them.
My issue is, the way squash works is, with my experience at other clubs, is you get them by the hour or hour and a half, and people socialize around, and you'll end up having 5 courts. How many doubles courts? 1 double, and so you end up with.
One doubles court.
Right, so that's 4, and, in these courts, and then how about kids after school?
You mean kids of members?
Members.
Yes,
Well,
but I
let's
just.
put it like this. We'd like to see it as active as possible.
No, I understand.
Now, the
but I
truth of the
just-
matter is, we have just, in terms of parking in the immediate vicinity, it's really not an issue.
Well-
Between the club and also Mr. Grau owns 30,
No, and that
We
was,
need to
my
have-
comment was
So-
about the parking. And my
Yeah.
comment about kids is, there are squash camps that are run after school by, I know, the Field Club and
Right.
Greenwich Country Club, which is a totally different model. And I don't want to get into that level of detail on this one piece of parking. I think if there's a cross-parking agreement or something, it's going to make at least me feel more comfortable that you can handle
we're,
those type of things.
no problem, with cross parking agreement, right? So we, yeah, yes, we
On
talked
the
about.
day-to-day, but on the day-to-day operation of this, we've got to handle it, either you've got to sell, and I don't know how you do it. You're going to have to give us something to tell us how you're going to do it on a day-to-day thing. Forget the camps and the other things, or the after-school things. But you can't have an hour sold 9 to 10, 10 to 11, because there's going to be that time.
But they control the property across the street.
Right, but,
Yeah, but you drive in and there's no parking, then you got to go out, go across it. It's a mess.
well, and also the parking across the street is quote-unquote spoken for. I mean, there's an approval for all that parking, so
know.
if they were gonna use some of that
But
for
it's the
this.
same number of members.
The same members.
It's the same.
Is that, okay, well, I think that,
So
but again, if there's gonna be children and tournaments and things like that, I don't know if, we've got restrictions on those types of activities for the swimming and,
But,
and-
So are these people using these courts the same 1,200 cap people from across the street?
right?
So in
Yeah.
other words, you're not going to sell an extra 50, whatever, 50
Squash
members or something?
memberships.
No,
It's
everything's
the
under
same
the-
people.
Under the whole system of the Greenwich Water Club.
Right.
So all the restrictions that you have on the Greenwich Water Club, the cap of the number of members and everything, this is going to be within that membership. That's correct. There's no expansion. We're not asking for any expansion.
So
But-
my
You would-
one concern,
Yeah.
squash is a winter sport. And you use a lot of the parking for boat storage.
Right.
And the boat storage is going up against where these people would park for overflow. So we're not closing it tonight, but I would like kind of a overall parking plan with these two and boat storage, because I just don't want us to say, yeah, you'll park across the street, but it's going to be all the way down.
Right. And is there a crosswalk there to get people from one side to the other?
There's not a crosswalk
Walk.
painted
Right.
on River Road at this time,
Right.
but there is the public access stairwell
You got
that's directly across.
You have to be on the mic.
Hear him
Is he
okay?
picking it up here?
There is the public access stairway that is directly across the driveway.
Where's the driveway?
That goes down to the water club with the access walk that's there. Are you looking at an aerial or?
I am, I'm just trying to
Yeah,
figure,
Mr.
so
Fox.
there is a crosswalk,
at the corner.
At the corner,
Right.
which is down
right.
at, what's that, Mead? No, Mead's that way, River.
Is this, which is?
Robertson.
Robertson,
Yeah.
thank you. So Robertson has the actual crosswalk painted here, which comes across near the driveway, and then the sidewalk that goes up to, but we also have the stair that comes across, and then a sidewalk that goes all the way through that aligns with the public access walkway that goes around the building. And we do put boats up against the wall here on this side,
Yeah,
but
during the
all the
winter.
parking places are just in front of those boats.
Yeah, but I'm saying in the winter, when you're doing the squash courts, you're blocked by all those boats that are in storage.
Well, we use some of the dirt lot that's here, right? And then the spaces that are permanent in front are all open all the way along that access way. We can also realign the boats.
I think what we need to
That
do,
was what I was requesting, that
a study or
this,
something.
just show
I don't have the
us-
site plan from,
No, I know, but
Show.
I understand.
But I think you should also at the same time give us a copy of this lease between, from, however you're gonna do this, so that we can, because I think all of the conditions that are part of, like the 1,200 membership cap, et cetera, all of those things that are gonna apply to this site should be in the lease agreement. Do you see what I'm saying? Because otherwise, otherwise, what's to say, I mean, there's gotta be some sort of legal document to tie it all together. Unless
Ties it all together is the zoning approval.
All right, in that case, the zoning.
The
approval
lease
needs
is
to have
subject-
Every single condition.
Well,
that
no,
we're
what the
talking
lease will
about
do,
plans.
what we would do is the lease, what we would do, I think we did it in the other, we did in other instances, we have as an exhibit to the lease, the actual zoning approval by you,
So in that
that it's
case,
subject to compliance with.
right, but so because what it should say, there should be some disclaimer then, that all of these conditions apply, that it has to be the same membership, whatever.
Whatever your conditions
Oh,
are.
Hold on.
Oh, no, sorry.
Every condition has to apply. And if there's a change and you decide to sell this site, let's say, that you have to come back to planning and zoning, because then you are gonna need to start talking about stagger.
I hear you.
All of that
No, I
stuff.
hear you. That's why we would make that specific, you'd make all those findings, because that's really, it's your findings and your decision that control the use of the property, and that's an excellent point. My only point is, I'll just make it an exhibit and refer to it as a requirement, as opposed to just take it and repeat it. Just that way, it's quite clear, and you have your actual words from your decision incorporated by reference as an exhibit. I mean, if I'm going to rewrite it again, I will, but the exhibit seems to work.
Yeah, Mr. Tressi, a question. How did the club or the owner of the property determine the number of squash courts that wanted to provide here?
How did we determine the number? Well, it was partially based upon how much floor area we could put on the site, how much coverage we could put on the site. Squash is popular. Truth of the matter is, I think if you could have more, you'd have more. You'd like to have more. But it's basically controlled by the normal zoning parameters. He feels that this number is important. It's a good amenity for his members. They've been talking about it. And it's kind of like the minimal number. You get that there is a critical mass, as I'm sure you realize, in all investments to be able to justify your costs. And so it is important for him to have that number, to have the doubles court as part of the program to justify the sacrifice may not be the right word, but taking this property, binding it forever in terms of maintaining the historical building, and making the investment to do that and giving up other rights. So it's economics, quite frankly,
Let
at
me
the end
ask
of
you
the
a
day.
question, though, since we're dealing with a lessor-lessee relationship here.
Yes.
Isn't that a matter to be worked out between the property owner and the club based on the amount of revenue the club feels it can generate to pay the lease payment? I mean, there's a sort of circularity here.
Yeah, there's
in economics.
circularity to it. I think there's a good word, because there's only so much the club can afford to pay, but the club's got to be able to justify that payment, right, for its members, because they're the ones ultimately who have to make the contributions to support it. So they have to feel there's enough invested in that use, and it's something that comes up. Andy's involved at Stanwich, and I've been involved in Bernie Tree a long, long time. And whenever we're talking about amenities for the club, we get into that very question, because you have to deal with the membership. What is their economic tolerance, and where do you balance it out? Bernie Tree last year, again, a good example, a couple of years ago, decided they wanted to put a bubble. There was a lot of discussion, for 2 tennis courts. And you're looking, okay, well, the pro claims he can have members come and give them lessons so many times. And you have to convince everybody in the club that it makes sense. And that's what happens. But you're right, it's a circularity or circular argument.
I mean, somebody.
For the owner, and what's his return, and what can the club afford to pay? That all went into Mr. Crowell's thinking to get to this point. I know you just joined the board, but the commission has seen at least 3 different applications. One involving raising the building, which they weren't fans of. Another was expanding a building almost the same size. So it's been difficult for Mr. Crowell. He's been maintaining this for a long, long time, and the inn hasn't been working. He wants to keep it. He's thought about selling it. He's talked to other people who've thought about developing it a few years ago and raising the building. There's been a lot of good, healthy discussions among Steve Bishop, the head of the HTC, and Mr. Crowell, and members of the commission and staff about doing what you can, working together to make this all,
I would just
live as it's, as we're proposing today.
Negotiation between the owner and the club and the rate that the club would charge its members, you considered a smaller number, a fewer number of squash courts?
No, that was suggested by the Board of Appeals at one point, and the answer was no. There's no way to support this. As I said, you're confined by zoning, but it does not make any sense at all, and that was outright rejection. There was a lot of it's very difficult with the Board of Appeals. That's why we're abandoning that approval in terms of what they were trying to do, and basically didn't have the vision that these commission members have. And Rick's worked very hard to maintain a very good rapport with his neighbors, and I think that's shown by the fact that
Yes,
we have an empty.
I just was going to comment that most new squash facilities will have minimum of 4 singles and a double.
Yeah.
Field Club, which we approved, has 5 singles and a double. I know Greenwich Country Club's looking to add a court. Brunswick, I think, has 6 singles and a double. And I don't know what GA has, but I think they have 4 singles and a double.
Well, the schools are going to have a certain number anyway they need, because they're in their leagues.
Yep.
So they need it. But here, it's driven by economic logic. It's tight.
Okay, one more thing for you to look at, or the planting plan that you're showing here is not the planting plan that was delivered to us. So I hope that's the planting plan you're proposing. It looks better than the one that we got, and that was going to be one of my comments, is that
Recently?
the planting plan with,
9/27.
the one I've got is dated 1/11/17. And you'll see the first tell is that the lights are not shown on that. And you can see that that property has got screening to the
Yeah, this is
south.
the old-
So we got a map that wasn't
no, This is
updated.
revised. This is the updated map. I don't know why, how this happened. This is the one, yeah, these are the ones.
Who was your assistant that submitted?
So is it,
Well, I know from Matt, and Matt sent Mr.
Yeah,
Fox,
Matt,
this is-
right, this is updated.
I know, it looks, as I say, it looks better. That was
no,
going to
throw-
be one of my big comments
throw these
tonight. I
out.
was going to, yeah, throw them out. Well, can you get us some that are up to date?
Bob must have sent you the wrong version, so I'll get back to him to make sure we.
These are revised. These were revised in September of this year.
Yeah, see, I've got one that doesn't show any revision.
No, I know, that's not right.
so when you're coming back, can you explain, I know it's the members of the water club, but is it possible that you would have, similar to like a rowing club, would you have a squash club, so to speak? Like, in other words, where you would start a high school program or something like that, or is the facility such that you don't have enough courts for that, or, I mean, how do you envision this actually working practically?
It's all part of the water club, just like our rowing club is now. I mean, we have, the junior program does allow non-member juniors to join the rowing program. And that was done way back when we began in order to offer more of the public access to the waterfront. So that was kind of done under a different kind of program when we started. But as you know, all of our masters and everyone else has to be a member of the club. So same thing with the squash program, they'll all be members of the club. We may have a slightly different membership like we do for our master rowers that is more focused on the squash program, but they will still have to support the clubhouse and other amenities of the club. So it'll be a comprehensive membership still that would offer some of the other benefits and potentially use of our club boats and things like that, so that all of the amenities are included and they help support the overall club. Now, if a group of them wants to be more competitive, as you know, in the Masters program, there's a group that get together and go to regattas and compete. To Mr. Fox's point, tournaments are a big thing around town. If they want to go out and compete in a tournament or do some different things, then we would try to organize that, yes.
But so it's kind of comparable to what you did with yoga over there. Like, in other words, you have to be a regular member, but when we, remember we had that issue with
Right.
the yoga instructor. So as opposed to the junior program. So it would be more comparable to the yoga or the rowing master's level than it would be to the junior program where non-members could come in and become the squash team or
I think
whatever.
you should just
Correct.
put a letter to that effect, because I think the rowing makes sense to make the waterfront accessible,
Right.
but this isn't a waterfront business use, so
Right.
and just to confirm to the caps and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean. Bottom line is, any of the users have to be members of the water club and they count against the cap.
Right.
And you're still well below the cap.
Right, that's all worth saying.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page there.
Back to the HO. You have given us a sort of the beginnings. But under the Declaration of Preservation Restrictions, the first whereas clause says, the improvements described in Schedule A. There is, the Schedule A that you gave us is blank. Can you tell
I
us
think-
what's going to go
yeah.
in that?
I know we had some internal discussions about it. I think the point is that what has to be clear is that we're preserving all parts of the building. We talk about Schedule A. And not one particular facade,
Right.
like the front facade. It's the entire building. And that we have to complete Schedule A in that vein.
Well, it says, and the improvements thereon described in Schedule A attached hereto and made a part thereof. Good Lord.
Right, that's
Anyway,
the
what
standard
is it-
language.
I understand that, but
Right.
Schedule A is blank. Can you tell us what you're going to be putting in Schedule A, or even tell us without, are you going to have copies of the drawings?
That's what I understood,
Okay,
that there would be, that there would be the final drawings.
just tell us,
Yes.
just put it in, that's all.
No, there'll be the drawings. Right, we're going to tell you when we get the plans, the final approved P and Z plans, you know,
If you don't, just tell us in language what you're going to put in Schedule A if you don't have the drawings or whatever it is.
well, at the end of the day, what usually happens is we go through a final set of drawings that you all wind up approved
Yeah.
through the staff, and the declaration is then filed simultaneously.
Okay, so you're
It's
all right
those
with that?
drawings,
Yep.
All right.
and
And
it's
then
those drawings reduced that get incorporated in.
So, and just to be clear, this is not a facade easement. This is this is a historic overlay. So you've got the front facade of the inn.
I assume they've got to produce,
I thought there was
Yeah.
a facade easement, and this is,
Well, it's a declaration of restrictions, and the problem, in the
what I'm
declaration,
saying,
there's
that-
some mixed language.
There is mixed language in there. I was talking to Chris about it, and we have to work with, we were talking about it because the format that we're using was more of a facade easement that you've used in the past.
Right.
And you want to, just talk about it being more comprehensive, in depth.
Absolutely.
I think it should.
And
I
that's
think
what
it
we
needs
have to
be,
work
yeah.
on.
because
with
these are
staff.
elevation drawings and so forth that do show what is being preserved of the house have to be in this.
Right, so
Yes.
the language has to
Yeah.
just reflect. the
We
picture.
reflect that.
Right,
We
okay.
internally talked about it. We know that came up,
Okay.
and it has to have more depth to it, given your new standards.
And then construction-wise, like how will, like the main inn, for lack of a better way of putting it, so that's going to be well, obviously the front, but how are you going to make sure that you don't accidentally knock over the nice part of the building?
Well, one is, don't have me work on it.
The site plan is the easiest way to look at it, I think, Katie, is, you know, Jen, the way the architect has kind of got it set up, the main structure is that front rectangle, and then everything kind of adds on the back. We have a lot of demolition to do to the existing structure. You can see it in the light part is all out back here. Those were all the additions to the main building that had come on over the years. So we will be demoing a lot of the additions and ad hoc little overhangs and different things and fire escapes that were all added onto the building. Once we get to the core, that stays intact.
Okay, so the rooms, so to speak, you could still be livable, actually, during construction?
Just about, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll be killing
Well-
power and doing other
Oh,
things,
right,
and,
right,
yeah,
right.
but, so,
You'd-
won't be
I don't
livable.
want people there, but
Right, I mean, we're pulling out the windows, we're
Right.
redoing the roof. I mean, there's a lot of work going on in the main
To restore
structure of
it.
the house. I mean, we're moving the whole front porch, rebuilding the
Yeah.
front porch, to
Right.
open that up again.
Okay.
I mean, we're really doing a lot of work to restore the house. You know, we're going
my
to scalp
instinct is you don't
shingles.
want
and-
anybody living in it.
No,
Right. But
No,
I
there
just
won't be
wanna make
anybody
sure
there,
that it's structurally such that it will, the risk of that front area falling over or something like that is actually very
no,
minimal.
she's an old girl, but she's pretty stout. She's pretty stout.
Pretty
You know, she's
sturdy,
pretty
okay.
sturdy in there. We do have some foundation work to do. We do have, you know, some things, she's tired.
And will the entire
ready.
interior basically be gutted so that you can update electrical and all that other stuff, or?
It'll all be brought to code, yes.
Yeah, so basically, it's just, the outside shell, you feel very
Well, the
confident?
outside and a lot of the inside walls, we're going to maintain a lot of the plaster, try and do a lot of things behind. We've already upgraded a lot of the wiring because we've had to maintain it as the inn.
Okay.
So we had to keep it safe. And I don't know if you remember, it was about 8 or 9 years ago, we did have a fire
Right.
in the lower part, and we had to bring a lot of things up to code then.
Okay.
So we've been through
Yeah.
a whole lot with this place. And I guess that's the only reason I'm still here trying to keep going with it, because I was ready to part with it a long time ago. But my wife and some members of the community and a few members of the club have really pushed along to try and save it. So we're working hard.
Mr. Tessie, you mentioned something, having a rapport with the neighbors. A few questions, understanding that thought. Looking at a new landscape plan, it's got lighting fixtures on it, it's got new landscape on it. Have you been to ARC with all this? It seems to me that actually to maintain that rapport with the neighbors, the most intrusive part about this whole project will be what I counted on the plan that I got, which was wrong, 13 light fixtures. And I would see, if I'm looking at this correctly, I'm seeing two different light poles that seem very, very tall. One of them is actually very contemporary, which doesn't seem to work with the nature of an HO. And I would think actually ARC would be very interested, and I think we should have them take a really good look at what you're doing with your lighting.
Sure.
Additionally, with the landscape, you do have an extensive landscape plan. We want to make sure that that actually works and will survive the way you have it intended over the course of the years. Because actually, it looks like actually you're doing a lot of planting around the building. We're going to make sure that we're not going to compromise the building itself with too much against it. Was that a loss to who uses the greenhouse? Or why the greenhouse is there, or the use of the greenhouse at all?
Again, Mr. Macri, we're trying to develop some uses that we can justify building this whole program. And what we're really looking to try and do is create a green garden for our restaurant, so that we can grow our spices and vegetables and different things year-round. Kind of a farm to table, as you know, is very popular now, or a healthy
So
kind
it's
of
the
environment.
greenhouse for the restaurant across the street?
Correct. For our club. It's all part of the club.
Right. That was in my letter.
Okay, the wall in front, it's being rebuilt from a fragment. Was HTC cognizant of that as well?
The HDC has seen the entire landscape plan. They've gone through everything, including the greenhouse,
The new
the
one?
roof, and everything.
The new
Yes.
landscape plan.
I'm sorry?
The new one, because we have a
Right.
different one.
That's correct, because it was updated when we went to them last. It was back in September. Been a while.
Your
When we
meeting with them
updated
was
some
in
things.
November.
They went to HEC in October of last year, so this plan is September of.
This year?
But then how come
Yeah.
what we have?
No, last year, 17.
Well, that was provided by the applicant, so I don't know
The
that.
landscape plan, unfortunately, that you received, I guess, from our landscape architect, he did not send you the revised plan. Why, I don't know. I'll have to ask Matt, Mr. Pop. I mean, he did all the work with all the plantings. You know, we did work with the neighbors in order to move the parking back and create some more green space. Extend, they really liked the wall with the white picket fence over the top, so we're bringing that all the way around to create a nicer backyard for them. So
Could you show us, there should be is there a detail on the drawing of that fence with the wall?
You know what, I don't think we have a detail on this plan, but we can ask Mr. Pop to add it.
Okay, I think that would be good, because okay, that's good, because I was going to ask about that. I think the other thing, Katie shot out of the room.
There she is.
I think we should put into the record tonight this memo that we got from Ann Young and Steve Bishop on support of this HO. And specifically, I want to make note of the fact that they say, additionally, I personally met with the neighbors to address their concerns and answer questions regarding the pros and cons of demolishing the building. They too agreed the current design is preferable for one that calls for demolishing the structure and rebuilding in a less appealing or a less appropriate design. So I think that was brought up, that there are no neighbors here, so I think that this is probably a correct representation of what happened. So I applaud you for that, because last time there were a lot of them here.
Yeah,
So,
of course, Toby probably helped you a little bit.
Just, so we are to go, so you're advising us, you want us to run our lighting and landscaping through the ARC?
yeah.
Okay, it's always fun. Let me make sure I have a little list here. My homework list is
Not the
correct.
architect.
So we have to get you the right landscape plan.
Yep.
I want to see a cross easement for parking. You want us to come in with a parking plan for 49 that shows that there's easy access?
And specifically boat storage.
Yeah, taking boat storage into account, we get that. You want to see a draft lease that will incorporate the final decision if you're kind enough to approve our application. And go to ARC.
Oh, I'm sorry, and it should note that if this property gets sold, they have to come back to P and Z, because then things like staggering of, because it
Yeah, I
won't be
don't-
the same membership.
All right, well, we'll work on that. We'll see what's in your letter and in other words, you're going to give a decision, if we get a decision letter, the lease is we'll see if there's something in the lease that you want that's not in your decision letter, we'll add it.
Right, Mr. LaRose said that, we were just noting that he was going to go through the approvals and get all the conditions that I think would apply.
Right.
to this site that should be incorporated into lease with an additional one, that if this property is then sold or used by a different nonprofit or whatever it is, that there has to be an understanding, it's got to come back to this commission, because you're managing it now, but what if someone else manages it? And it's a wholly different set of membership at that point. So then the commission will need to look at what that cap is, how the parking will work
I
on
don't
the
think it's,
property.
again, it's a seal issue, it's a use issue.
Well, but it is a
if-
use issue, because right now the use is tied into the membership
I
across
agree,
the
that's what I'm
street.
saying.
So,
I
yeah.
agree with that, it's a use issue.
Right.
Yeah.
So the concern is if the property gets sold to another user, how are they going to use the property? That's
I
all
agree
I'm-
100%, just what we talked about. So that's fair, and we accept that, because that's what we said we were going to do. So it's only fair that it be made a condition and embodied in all the legal documents, internal and external. We agree.
You're going to tell us what's in Schedule A?
Schedule A, we're going to just,
It was explained that when they submit their documents for approval to staff, and once they're approved, that document log will be made as part of Exhibit A.
we're going to revise the easement, and we're going to note in Schedule A, final plans approved by commission to be
Just-
incorporated.
just-
But
just
we're
so
going to
it's not a
note, it's not
blank
going to just
sheet.
say blank Schedule A next time. It's going to refer to the plans, because we have to work on the easement
The other
with
thing is
staff
that we
anyway.
have to decide what we're doing with 4 and 5. And if we're going to take out that line in 5,
That's our job.
well,
Well, you can interpret it as.
I'd rather
you
not leave it to interpretation, because I think if it bollocks up this one, who
Exactly.
knows who is going to read it and.
Right,
have
but
it-
that would mean
might not
that's
be
a
as
two-part
smart
thing,
as
because
we
if
are.
you don't believe that it reads that way now, then you do have a problem for this application. So you can interpret it the way you see fit now, and then if you want staff to clarify language, just like we did on this other business,
I
we can
do.
easily do
Yes.
that at a future date. But we
Totally
can't, to tie it into this application, if you don't want to interpret it that way, would mean that this application should
The
withdraw
interpretation.
and come
Ugh.
back,
The
was it, right,
interpretation is difficult, and we would like to have the wording be clear.
clarified.
Okay.
Yes,
Perfect, okay.
just so we don't have to run into it again.
Exactly.
And, okay, is there anything else that pops up? So we have.
Mr. Tessie, you were saying the ARC, I didn't hear the commission say, is that lighting or?
Lighting and landscaping, I think, is what Mr. Macri
Yes,
said.
lighting and landscaping, please.
With the idea being that, just to clarify, you want that white portion on the left there to be screened somehow. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's fair to say. If you
What do you-
pull up this, so
Well, I
the
don't
only.
know.
is on the new plan.
No, okay,
Yeah, but-
yeah,
but-
okay.
yeah.
That's what I was
Very well.
trying to, I was trying to peer at that, but put the picture up, the color picture back up, please, Mr. Tessie. Yes, please. So the negative comment that came up yesterday is that it was a desire for additional screening to soften that wall.
In the front yard you're talking about?
Yeah, in the front yard, to
See
do
on the-
something to soften the appearance of that wall. Because, and I think that the applicant will do a fine job with this, because,
Ms. Alban, I think it's actually
But-
two intents. One is to provide some kind of visual screen of that blank facade.
right, exactly.
At
That's
the
all my
same
concern
time,
was.
to make sure that the landscaping that's in front of the facade is being preserved doesn't overpower it, because that's the intent of this whole application, is
But what
preservation of
he's-
those portions of the building there.
But if it's gonna look like this, the right hand side
Exactly.
is
It
perfect.
doesn't, what you're looking for doesn't look like that.
Right, that's.
On the right, it's going to be low, on the left, it's going to be high.
And
Exactly.
the big tree in the front is going to stay, right? The big tree in the front where the swing is?
Yes.
Yeah, that's going to stay,
Hopefully.
okay.
We lost the other big tree.
Right, and
So, but that one seems to be
You
helping.
may lose it tonight, who knows?
I used it tonight, I was.
Do you ever consider a multi-story squash facility as opposed, that wouldn't have the frontage issue that this plan
Go deeper.
presents?
Go deeper or higher?
2 stories for the squash.
I mean, even, I think when you look at it, unfortunately, this color photo kind of just pops out and doesn't do the building justice, but this section is set back. If you look at, the site plan, I think it's 30 feet or so, so we're running on a ledge, that I'd have to scale it off, but you can see how far it actually is set back, And it's actually where the existing building, we start right where the existing building now has that addition and goes back. And if you drive down River Road and you see how far back away from the original house that addition is, it really is not a big a problem as I think you're all looking at when you look at it in just the plain view. But when you get into the actual dimensional.
My question was, from a design
So-
standpoint, did you consider a two-story squash?
If we went two-story, we would have been higher in the back than the main structure, the main house that we were trying to preserve. Again, would have overpowered it. We would have been over height restrictions. We had a lot of issues. We already went below grade as low as we believed we could in order to reduce the height of this. I think one of the initial comments that Mr. Maitland made when we came here the first time around was that, or it might have been Mr. Mack, I don't remember, was that there was a section of this building that when we had it on grade, I think you used the word crashing into, or, interfering with the treatment that went along the original building, and
Now
so.
you've been able to preserve that mansard roof going all the way around, which is critical
Correct.
too.
So we did look at a lot of different options, and that was some of the early input, probably now almost 2 years ago when we started this and went through the process. And we've been to at least four different meetings with the HDC, going over the different aspects of the architecture, bumping out the side walls to give it some dimension, changing the rear of the building, the other sides of the building, stepping things back, talking about the landscaping, everything they wanted to see, all to all of your points. Minimizing the impact of the addition, emphasizing the historic home, so. And
just-
it's all mature there now, as you know, it's all well planted, and we'll be restoring a lot of what's already existing. So we're not changing a lot of what's there. We're trying to keep the natural streetscape and original look as much as we can.
So does the commission want the applicant to go to the ARC before they come back here? Because in which case we would need an extension, because now we're looking at a May meeting.
I would think that would be the case, because actually, I think with other applications, I don't think we'd want to move ahead without their
On the landscaping and the
recommendations.
lighting.
Yeah.
See if I can get them on early. This is a favor to
April
us.
meeting's out of the question right now.
Huh?
The April meeting would be out of the question
For ARC.
for the ARC, so that wouldn't hold, because we're within the deadline, and it's a week
Week
and a half
o-
away.
It's next week.
They only have one meeting?
One meeting a
We
month.
only have one meeting on the first Wednesday of every month.
So,
But we're not too far, I mean, we're actually 2 weeks away, isn't it?
well, their meeting was canceled for earlier in the month, so their March meeting is actually coming up, and then they have another meeting for April.
Oh, that's what we're talking about, the April meeting.
Right. and
Should be
they-
able,
I think you were outside the deadline for that, that's why,
yeah, but the commission can,
well, I can see what I don't know.
It
what
might
that-
be full, I mean, we have no
I don't know what-
idea,
I'm
you
just
know?
speaking, I don't know what this.
I would think they, for our consistency, they should go, and before we actually make any kind of decision, just to get the recommendation.
So let's see if we
So we'll have
can
to
get
see
Let's
if we can get you
on,
on
'cause
it.
it's-
So would you- yeah.
one. Okay.
because it would be here's the 4th, I think your meeting's the 3rd, so it would be the 4th, I think.
So it'd be
of
the
April.
17th of April would be the first meeting we'd have you back post if you go on the
If we
ARC.
can get on ARC tomorrow, if we can submit tomorrow.
Otherwise, it'd be the first meeting in May, which
Yeah.
I believe is the first.
Well, it'd be good to get on, we prefer to get on April.
Yeah,
Second.
second.
But
That's a good question, too. It could be the second May, yeah. So we'll try to get you squared away with the ARC between now and the April meeting and see what.
all right, so we got to get the right plans from Matt right away and get them in.
Yeah.
But
Is the lighting on that?
I don't know why they got submitted.
Well, the only thing was that it would be nice to get a sketch of that wall with the picket fence on it, since that's been important to the neighbors. I'd like to make sure.
Screen that.
Thank you.
Right, you're right, add the sketch,
All right,
add fence.
Right?
that's it. Well, no, we got two decisions to make.
Yeah, but the court reported.
The court, yeah.
All right.
We're done.
Formally ask if there's anybody in the audience that had anything to say, or they do that?
First,
I-
I'm going to move the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Move the minutes from March 6th and 18, and February 22nd, 2018, as submitted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
the deliberation.
It was a long one.
Yeah. Well, no, we got two things to decide tonight, Andy.
I'm
Okay.
not leaving.
All right, ma'am, would you please give me a motion on, the first one is,
Liquor permit,
um,
or do you
Yes.
want to do
No.
11? Okay.
do the liquor permits first.
I hereby move approval of the proposed. I hereby move approval of the proposed amendments to Section 6194 of the regulations. In so doing, the commission notes that a Central Greenwich parking utilization study was completed December 8th, 2017, which found parking to be ample for the existing uses even during peak hours. It also concluded that the expansion of the liquor permit holding establishments could be accommodated by the existing supply of parking. The study further recommended the elimination of all liquor distances. However, the study suggests the town maintain its prohibition on liquor sales above the ground floor. The commission also notes that Westcog has reviewed and finds this regulation change of local interest with minimal intermunicipal impact. Further, we find that the proposed change is consistent with Goal 4.1 of the POCD to promote business, social, civic, and cultural activities and to maintain residential and economic vitality of the downtown.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The next one is the modification of the Section 6109, Pren D.
And feel free to jump in on how I word this.
Well, just-
I hereby move approval of the proposed amendment to Section 6109D, which will clarify some language regarding fractions and also the calculation of bonus units in the amendments previously approved for the HO. The commission notes that Westcog has reviewed and advises that this regulation amendment is of local interest with minimal intermunicipal impact. And we further find that this amendment is consistent with the goals of the 2009 POCD to protect historic and cultural resources.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Okay,
That's it.
I earn my keep for the night.
Mr. Chair, if we could talk about the discussion item for the ableist,
The discussion item,
Yes, so we discussed.
did you go there today?
I did, sir.
And what is your
Parking lot was
findings?
well utilized, I will say, at about 2:30 in the afternoon. It was nearly full. It did not look to be troublesome. I mean, besides, I was able to
Seemed to
pull
be
in.
functioning properly.
It seemed to be functioning properly, and like I said, it
Make
was
a
well
positive
used, so it was
finding.
actually good. It was a good use of a couple minutes to sit and watch people pulling in and pull out. So
Okay, so it did function properly?
it did function properly.
Okay, I think that, do you want to, need a motion on it?
I think we do need one.
I think we do just by the decision of the commission.
Do you want to say
So
anything?
we hereby move, following staff review, we hereby move concurrence with the as-built parking lot at the ableist facility.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anything else?